Hello and welcome to episode 2 of Inside the Maverick. Today I'm joined by Achillies27. Connery is a Maverick specialist. You might have known him from a few green-white based Maverick decks back in the day. But he's come back and put together a pretty nice green-white-black deck that has put up some really nice results as well. Connery, how you going?
I'm doing pretty good. I've been I just finished my finals, just hanging out, having a good time, playing some Magic, trying to learn how to play StarCraft.
Nice.
Yeah.
Actually, I saw in Discord just before we made this call. It just had Achilles27 in StarCraft 2, and I was like, oh, I don't want to, I don't want to pull him out of this.
Yeah, no, I just played a game before. I was like, I got time.
Nice, that's cool. So
Yeah.
tell me about yourself. Where are you from? How did you get into Magic? How did you get into Legacy and Maverick? Your local sort of scene.
Yeah. So I live in Waterloo, Ontario, in Canada. I go to university right now, University of Waterloo. I study psychology. I'm in my third year, so I'm 20 years old, which is I think makes me one of the younger Magic players around. Um, and I started playing Magic at the start of university, but it was mostly casual. And then about like after a year, like learned that like Grand Prix were a thing, and I was like, I want to go to some of those. So me and some friends went, and we went to a team trios, and we won our first round, and that was like we thought that was the peak, and then we won our second round, and then we lost the rest, and it was like it was a good day. um, but yeah, I didn't play Legacy until there until there was some tournaments in my hometown of North Bay, and one of my friends owns basically like all of Legacy. Like, yeah, I think he has like 8 or 12 Force of Wills and like
Damn.
just like everything to go with it. So whenever there is a Legacy event, he fields like half of the decks. So
Oh,
we,
that's
we
cool.
started having it's really great. um, and yeah, so he lent me Maverick, and I played it. I think I went like 2-1 or something, and I was like, man, this deck is sweet. So I kept playing it, and then after I still didn't buy any Legacy like in paper because I didn't want to spend a bunch of money. But after a Grand Prix where I was playing Modern Burn, and I lost my first round to Titan Shift because he was on the play and I was on the draw, and we both had turn 4 kills twice in a row. And that was the one after, and I was like, well, this this sucks.
That sounds like modern.
Yeah, so I was like, all right. So I dropped from the Grand Prix, and then the same friend lent me Check Pile, um, and I got to play that for the rest of the weekend in side events, and like I loved it. Check Pile is one of my favorite decks that I'd never play, but I just really like it, and I think I would if I was gonna play something like that, I'd probably play Strifo Pile right now.
Okay, yeah.
Um, but yeah, so then after that, I bought Maverick Online, played a bunch of tournaments. I won, or I didn't win any online tournaments yet. I've top aided 3 challenges. I've top aided, I think, one of the format qualifier things from last year,
Yep.
and I think that's about it for my legacy achievements. And then I went to Eternal Weekend this year or last year on September, and I went there to play Ad Nauseam Tendrils in the main event, but I played the Modern Championship the day before, and I actually top eighted that with Burn.
Oh,
So then I
nice.
couldn't play the Legacy because the top 8 ran at the same time. Uh, so I borrowed Ad Nauseam Tendrils from a friend and like bought him some cards and like sleeves for the deck so that I could borrow it. And that I didn't play a single match of Ad Nauseam Tendrils for the whole weekend. Um,
Nice.
but I mean, I guess that's pretty good though. I was pretty happy. I was not expecting to like you always want to like top 8 like the big tournaments, but you never expect to. And then when you do, it's like, holy crap, this is awesome.
Yeah, I guess if there's a
Uh,
reason not to play Legacy, then top aiding a pretty big event the day before is a pretty good reason why.
yeah, exactly. Um, yeah, so and then since then I have Green White Maverick, and I've been building like I have most of the cards for Green White Black Maverick in paper. I'm just missing like the second Bayou and Verdant Catacombs. I don't have those yet. So right now I have a fully functioning Green White Maverick deck, but I can kind of play Abzan Maverick in paper. And when COVID-19 isn't around, the legacy scene in Waterloo is actually awesome. There's like there's 2 legacy events a week most of the time,
Okay.
and there's like anywhere from like 6 to 16 people depending on the week. You know, it hovers around 10, which is awesome. Like for weekly events that happen, like there's multiple different stores in the same city. It's really crazy to have this many people playing Legacy in like a student town where people don't have a lot of money. um, so
Yeah,
that's really cool.
10 is very nice because you know you're going to fire.
Yeah.
I think a lot of, at least if you're my friends who are sort of standard modern players, hear that, you know, Legacy gets 10 or 12 and they're like, oh, is that it? It's like, that's really good, especially
Yeah, it's really good.
for a consistent number. It's really nice. And if you go above that, then that's fantastic.
Yeah, and then yeah, about like once a week they have the 1Ks, the like that are, or yeah, so once a week they have 1Ks, and then each week it changes format. So they
Ah,
had
that's
Legacy
interesting.
1Ks, the only Legacy 1K that they've run so far because it stopped being ran obviously when
Yep.
COVID happened.
Mm.
I got to win it, so that was great.
Oh, nice.
That was my only like big paper win in Legacy so far, but it was a lot of fun.
Nice, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So in front of us we have the Green White Black Maverick deck that you've been running recently. Obviously, you kind of came to the format with Green White. Probably around COVID, you took a bit of a break from online, and you've come back with this. So the big question, I guess, from your standpoint, is why did you add the black splash?
Yeah. So the biggest reason is I just like you just don't get punished right now in the format. Like Mono Red Prison it doesn't really exist.
Mm-hmm.
Death and Taxes has gone down a lot, so you can pretty reliably get the third color, and you can almost always just fetch like Bayou, Scrubland, and Savannah, and you're just fine. Like you just never get punished. So for me, it's kind of like a lot of the times my argument when I was playing green white and people would try and get me to play the splash is like, are the cards? A lot of people they tunnel pretty hard on like, oh, Plague Engineer is really good, you should play it, but you have to look at like what the purpose of it is and why you're gonna play it and what cards could you be playing that are already in your colors, right? But now it's just like, even though Plague Engineer is like a bit better or whatever than like some of the green white alternatives, it doesn't matter because there's just no cost really. Like at this, like of course, obviously you're still gonna get those hands where you have like 2 Bayou and a Gaia's Cradle or whatever. Like you will get punished a little bit, but it's not even close to what it was like a couple years ago when like Mono Red Prison was actually played, and Death and Taxes was one of the most common decks. So I feel like right now there's no real reason to not splash, and then the reason why I chose to splash black specifically is because Plague Engineer and Kaya are both nuts right now.
Yeah.
And Decay is just really good. And I hate Oko. I hate playing against Oko. That's one of the reasons, like, it's just the worst. I feel like, I know we're probably going to talk about it later, but I feel like Maverick right now is reasonably, like, placed that it can beat, like, pretty much every deck. Even most of, like, I feel like the only combo deck that really gives us trouble is Doomsday.
Yeah, definitely.
But any deck that plays Oko, it's just like we just lose 10 percentage points in that matchup, and it's just the worst. I dislike it.
Yeah, it's a rough feeling when they land their first Oko because you kind of know that this game is going to go long and probably not in your favor, but you haven't lost it, so you do want to keep competing.
Yeah, and you finally kill it, and then they play the second Oko, and it's like, perfect. Awesome.
Yeah, it's rough. One thing that's really nice about Kaya that I've found, and also Plague Engineer, is that you can hopefully answer something. So with Kaya, if you tick down on like an Astrolabe, you still have the Kaya around. And with the Plague Engineer, if you name, Snake and get rid of an Ice Fang, you've also dealt with the Ice Fang, but you still have the Plague Engineer. So I think Maverick's got a few tools recently Collect Ouphe a little bit as well. So instead of answering Astrolabes with things like Abrupt Decay, you do have Collect Ouphe just to switch them off, which makes your opponent have to deal with it with a card. So there's a bit more value that Maverick has in regards to how its cards match up against your opponent.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great reason to play Black right now as well. It's just that you get these really good value cards. Decay's been really strong as well. One card that I have been playing around with is Vraska, which I can see in your sideboard, which I think is probably, other than a blast effect on the stack, if you're playing Punishing Maverick, it's probably your best answer to Oko if you can, if you can always have it the turn after they play it. Because again, you get to destroy Oko, but then still keep the Vraska around.
Yeah, I've had that happen once so far, where they've played the Oko, made a food, and then I've been able to kill it with Vraska. And,
Nice.
It was very nice. I'm pretty sure I won that game.
So we also have Once Upon a Time in this list, which, what did you cut for the 4 onces?
Well, the way I built this deck specifically was I went from the green-white list that I was playing before COVID, like before companions and all that dumb things, and I just was like, all right, I want to play Plague Engineer. I want to play Kaya because I saw a list playing Kaya and I remembered that Kaya exists, and I was like, this card is awesome, and I wanted to play Decay. So I just kind of started. I like basically copied and pasted the green-white list. So I had onces already in there, and then I cut from my green-white list. I cut like Sanctum Prelates, like anything with 2 white pips.
Yep.
I just like those are easy cuts. And Stoneforge package, which I like Stoneforge, but I think Plague Engineer is just as good or better in a lot of matchups.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
But yeah, I Once Upon a Time is awesome. So I don't even like. Actually, when I built this deck, I built a different one without Once Upon a Time because I saw a lot of people were playing without it, and I was like, all right, that's fine. And I guess I'll look at that list. And so instead, I ran an extra 2 dorks.
Okay.
And
Was that a 4th noble and a 2nd bird?
oh no, I added 1 extra dork. Yeah, just a 2nd bird.
Okay, cool.
I had the 4th Green Sun Zenith for sure. And I don't know what else. It looks like... Oh, I added the Vraska to the main since it's not a creature, so I might as well have it in the main. And,
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
and a 2nd library. That's the 4th card. Kept the lands the same, though. Because I feel like 23, counting the Dryad Arbor, is I prefer 22, counting the Arbor, when I'm playing green-white, and I feel like black just needs the extra land to be, like, more safe. So I don't like putting too many lands in my deck, like just in general. As a general rule, when I was playing Burn, I would try and go to 19 lands as often as possible.
Yeah, because I think when the deck kind of came out in popularity, it was playing 2 Savannahs, a Scrubland, a Bayou, and kind of recently it's added the 5th Jewel.
Yeah.
And I think again that's because of the tick up in just not getting your mana isn't too affected by cards like Wasteland or Blood Moon right now.
Yeah, and also just I think the splash is a lot heavier now, with people playing multiple main deck black cards. Makes you really want that 2nd value because it will, like, the first one gets wastelanded a lot.
Yeah, definitely. And because we have the mana acceleration, you kind of want to make sure you have black as early as turn 2, because if you start on Noble Hierarch, you do want the black so you can cast a turn 2 Kai or Plague Engineer if it is relevant.
Yeah, I would say definitely Bayou is going to be the land that you fetch most of the time first.
Yeah.
Specifically for that reason. Like, Noble Hierarch, as awesome as it does not tap for black. Which
Sadly.
is unfortunate.
Yeah. So what do you feel? I guess Doomsday is definitely a deck that I've struggled a little bit against with Maverick. What are some of the decks that you believe Green White Black Maverick struggles against?
I think Doomsday, obviously decks like the blue-green Natural Order, like, just lame deck.
Yeah.
The one that plays like Uro and Progenitus and like Iceman Coatls and Oko, just the worst.
Yeah. And
that deck I don't think I've ever beat.
Okay.
Or if I have, it was like just because they milled to 5 and I had like turn 1 dork, and then was able to just like, you know, ramp out a knight and wasteland them. So that one's bad. Decks that are structured similarly to that, like I feel like that's how annoying Oko is you can kind of just lump all those decks. Like, yeah, they're slow and they play Oko. Those ones are pretty bad for Maverick.
Yeah.
Um,
Are we going to call that category Slowco?
you could.
Okay.
um, but yeah, so like those ones are pretty bad. I feel like that's that's the actual big reason why I started playing Magic again after the like few weeks of break was I saw people were talking about how like the Oko decks, like Snoko specifically, was like barely being played, and I was like, all right, I'm in. Let's try this out. And yeah, so basically any deck that's running Oko and like a combination of like either like a quick win with like natural order or like sweepers, because Oko and sweepers just go so well together. It makes it really hard for Maverick to do anything.
Yeah.
Like even if we have our best draws against Oko and then like Toxic Deluge or Terminus or Supreme Verdict or Dead of Winter, like it's just if they play an Oko and then next turn they sweep the board, you're just gonna lose. Like it's there's not much you can do.
Yeah.
And yeah,
Because one of the best ways that I find to try to counteract Oko is by just flooding the board with good threats, so that if one is a 3/3, hopefully the others can attack with it to finish off the Oko. But if
yeah,
you do go
exactly.
wide, these decks punish you with Dead of Winter, and it's just the worst feeling because there's nothing you can really do. You could play like maybe Meddling Mage or Sanctum Prelate on 3, but these decks just have so much removal at different CMCs that it's so hard to do that and keep them on the board.
Yeah, for sure. That's another reason why I didn't like try and fit Sanctum Prelate. I don't think I really like the card Sanctum Prelate, but I don't think it's very good right now because I think most blue decks are diversifying their answers.
Yeah.
And it's not even like they have to try that hard to diversify their answers because now they just naturally have Oko and like Swords to Plowshares. And then since they're running 4 colors, they'll just, run Abrupt Decay as well.
Yeah.
So it's all like it's not like they are making like a conscious decision to play around Sanctum Prelate. They just do because it's already the best choice.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
I don't miss Sanctum Prelate, even though it's really nice to have, especially in the combo matchups.
Yeah. Speaking of protection, there is no Mother of Runes here.
Yes, I don't think Mother of Runes is very good right now.
Yeah.
I don't think she has been very good for a while. Like when I was playing green white, I cut her down to 3 or 2 a lot of the times. I just like she can be good, but I feel like a lot of the problem is that the matchups where you want her the most are the ones that are running Plague Engineer now and like other ways to get around it. So I feel like she's never great. Like she never like impresses me anymore because you don't see Death and Taxes around, which is that's when you really want it.
Yep.
But that matchup's like non-existent now. And then Maverick, they're playing Plague Engineer or Zealous Persecution or anything along those lines. And then blue decks have Oko now, so she's underwhelming there also. So yeah, those were just easy cuts to make room for all the other cards that I really like to play.
Yeah, it's kind of nice
Like
because
Kaya's.
without Mum, you do get more removal. You obviously this deck has a fair amount of non-creature cards, pretty close to 50-50. I played a list last night and I realized that the deck is 50-50 on creatures and non-creatures. But here, okay, we have just one more creature. I guess the Plague Engineers, there we go. Okay. But yeah, usually you might see a list with like 4 swords, like 4 green suns, and maybe like 1 Sylvan Library. So you're not usually going above in the old lists like maybe 10 non-creature spells in the main deck. But
Yeah.
here, yeah, it's really interesting to see. Even Mark last week was going through one of his decks where I think he had more non-creatures than creatures.
Yeah. Well, they
Which
just keep printing so many good ones, right?
yeah, yeah, it's kind of tough to keep a sort of reasoning as to why you would just be running a bunch of creatures over these extra removal spells or planeswalkers, which
Yeah.
is really interesting because I think Maverick's associated as like a creature-based mid-range deck, but as this keeps happening, it's obviously moving a little bit more away from running just a plethora of creatures as your answers instead of just non-creature spells like Abrupt Decay or Kai or similar cards.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's a pretty... Like, I think another big reason for even before, like, I was Splashing Black is Planeswalkers don't get board wiped, so that's another reason to up the non-creature count. Like, creatures... Any creature just has the text that it dies to Swords to Plowshares, right? So they have to be really good to make the cut for the most part.
Very true. Kai is actually an interesting one because I feel like it's a newer card for most Legacy players to play against, and they don't realize how easy it can be to win through the ulti, even just with a few hits, which is pretty nice.
Yeah.
So last night I was able to hit them down to like 12, and then they just had 12 cards from Kai's Tick Up in exile. And there's been a few times where they could have attacked it, but they attacked me instead.
Yep.
And it's just like, do you not know what this does? It's a little bit like Questing Beast. Like something just happens and you're like, they didn't read it.
Yeah. It's I've killed a couple of Progenituses with Questing Beast. It's awesome.
Yeah, definitely. Or even just some really cool plays that I think happened because some of the cards that we're playing now are a little bit newer than most.
Yeah.
So with boarding for this deck, I think one good deck to start on is probably Rug Delver, seeing that it's kind of probably the most popular deck right now. How would you board against Rug Delver?
I would cut probably... Well, the Collector Ouphe is always the first thing I cut in that matchup.
Yeah.
I think it's worth noting also whenever I do sideboard, like I don't think, unless it's like a deck that I've played a lot and I've like made it like a sideboard guide like I did for my other deck, I change things up often just because I want to see what feels best. But here, the cards that we want to cut are 3-drops and 4-drops. Obviously, we keep Questing Beast because hasting threats out is really good, and you never know, they might run like either True Name or even just Questing Beast kills a lot of things, right?
Yeah.
But we cut Plague Engineers because they cost 3, and they Rug Delver specifically. Like against other Delver decks, you can keep in Plague Engineer, but Rug Delver, the only card they have that dies to Plague Engineer is Delver before it flips. So
yeah,
it's 3 mana for a 2/2 Death Touch, which is not good. I've been playing with trimming a Knight of the Reliquary.
Okay.
And if I don't know what else to cut, I'll also just like trim another Once Upon a Time.
Yeah. Okay.
But I definitely am reluctant to cut too many Once Upon a Times because this is obviously a matchup where mana is really important. And I bring in the 3 paths for sure. I bring in Vraska for sure.
Nice.
And then, depending on how I feel, I might bring in 1 choke if I'm like on the play. But give or take, like this is what it would look like on average.
Yeah.
Yeah. I definitely like you never want to bring in 2 chokes, and like just because if you draw both, you're just gonna lose that game.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate, but if you draw both, like you just spent 6 mana.
Yeah.
Or 2 cards, and then you're not accomplishing anything.
I've definitely had the situation where I've played choke and then I'm just facing 2 flip delvers and it's like, well, is this choke really doing anything?
Yeah. And then the other consideration from the board would be Chalice, but I used to love bringing in Chalice against Delver, and now I don't like it because they have so many answers to it. Again, like Oko just being in their main deck already makes Chalice feel bad.
Yep.
And post board, they're always bringing in Abrades and stuff anyways. So I don't like Chalice for those reasons. And then also with the fact that I'm running 3 paths in my board, like we need 1-drops. Like our removal is really important in this matchup. So
yeah, exactly.
Chalice being on 1 is almost as bad for us as it is for them, if not worse a lot of the time, because they just have so many like ways to deal with it if it matters to them, and then if it doesn't matter to them, they can just leave it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if they drop a threat and you play a Chalice for 1, you're kind of protecting them from the majority of your removal.
Yeah.
Which feels pretty bad. But yeah, Rogue's really interesting because there are some opponents that get really aggressive on your mana, and there are some that give you some leeway. But there's been a lot of times where I've struggled just by building my mana base because they're so aggressive on bolting your Hierarchs and Birds, wastelanding you, trying to play a threat in between that. But sometimes you can get to the stage where you don't have a land to play and you pass, and you just know that that's kind of a pretty big turning point.
Yeah, I find the only times when they aren't really like heavily pressuring my mana is when they either go like Delver into Dreadhorde Arcanist, like stuff like that. They probably won't pressure your mana. Or the other big time is just when they have an Oko and they know they can just wait. So they'll just they'll bolt your things, they'll daze something, they'll force will something, they'll just play an Oko on an empty board, and they don't have to worry about your mana because what are you gonna play?
Yeah, exactly. I do like the parts as well because I think for the builds that have Hooting Mandrills, sometimes you can use your swords a little bit too aggressively on the early creatures and then be stuck with your decays when Hooting Mandrills hits the board, which is pretty rough. So I've tried to be a little less aggressive on a turn 1 Delver, because even if I can sword to turn 2 Arcanist over the Delver, I'm probably a little bit more happy.
I normally wait if they play a Delver. Depending on, obviously, if you just have like 2 swords and a path in your hand or something.
Yeah.
But especially game 1, you want to wait for the Dreadhorde Arcanist, unless you have, again, like Scavenging Ooze or something in your hand. Because Arcanist is it just single-handedly wins the game if you don't have the swords. Like, if it lives for 1 turn, it's already like, alright, I guess I'll keep playing.
Yeah,
I don't know,
it's pretty crazy.
It's the worst.
Especially, even something like a Brainstorm, like pre-attack, draw 3, put 2 back, play fetch, attack, draw 3, put 2 back.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, just so much value even if you have like a blocker of some sort. The one thing that I kind of hate about Rug now is that if you could play a Knight as a 4/4, you would be in a pretty good spot. But now you got to kind of get it to a 7/7 before you don't have to worry about Bolt, Arcanist, Bolt, which is just
that's a really annoying interaction.
brutal. And then a few players I've been playing against have been playing Submerge as well, which is pretty rough.
Yep.
Just because.
Yeah, I think they normally play at least like one. I think they've actually upped it a bit just because I know there's a lot of depths now since Rug is so popular.
Yeah.
I think that's one thing that makes Submerge even more popular among them. And yeah, I've in my experience, games where they draw Submerge, you should almost accept that is just you just lost to the card at that point. Like,
yeah.
I wouldn't worry about those games too much because that card is just so good against us.
Yes. Yeah, especially when you're stumbling to find like a threat and they just put like a birds on top. You're like, come on. I do not want this. Or you
just play your first Knight of the Reliquary and you're like, all right, this is it. This is when we're going to turn it. And then they just submerge it and it's like, well, they just like basically double time walk to me. This is not good.
Sylvan Library is interesting. I've always liked it. I know a few players usually cut 1 if they're playing more than 1 because of how aggressive sometimes Rug can be. But I really enjoy it. Most decks, once it's off the stack, they might have something like Brazen Borrower, and the other card that I've seen is Return to Nature. But a lot of the times, once you get it down, it can really help, because even if you're not aggressively drawing extra cards, you're kind of expanding your hand by 3.
Yeah, even when you don't draw the extra cards, it's basically just brainstorming every turn, right? And brainstorm is just awesome, obviously.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, especially if you see like 2 lands in path, like I was going to draw those 2 lands and now I can actually draw into that path instead, which is pretty sweet. I did see a list, I haven't come across it yet, but there was a list that Rich Cowley was playing with a snow-covered island in the mana base. And that really gets me, because if I path a creature and they get a snow-covered island, I
always expect it now, and that's why if I am sitting on swords and path, I always swords first because I don't want to risk it. But so I like to wait until hopefully they have enough mana that the island isn't as important. But now, whenever I cast path and like they fail to find, I just like am like super happy. And I'm like, all right, I don't have to worry about this for game 3. We're good.
Yeah, exactly. You did mention that for some builds you'd keep Plague Engineer in. Is the main card for that Young Pyromancer?
Yeah, pretty much. Young Pyromancer or True Name Nemesis is the other one.
Yeah.
That you want to have Plague Engineered for.
Yeah, that makes sense. Would you change anything else based on like a blue-red matchup?
The Plague Engineers would probably stay in.
Yep.
Other than that, it's pretty similar. Like I just bring in the 3 paths, even though they can get basics. It's still just so good.
Yeah, I'd rather give them
might,
mana than them have a threat like Young Biomancer or
yeah,
Dreadhorde.
exactly. I might not bring in the Vraska and the Choke because blue red is a lot more. It's quicker. So you definitely want to just focus on staying alive. Like they pressure your life total really hard. I think some of them have like between 6 and 8 bolts. So even if you like stabilize, you can still just die to the burn a lot of the time. So
Yeah,
just want to trim all those expensive cards.
Yep, I like that a lot. All right, what about snow?
It's been a while since I had to play against snow, and just one more thing about the rug matchup is I actually sometimes I would cut the second Kaya. That's the other card I would cut instead of potentially like the fourth Knight of the Reliquary or the Once Upon a Time is normally what stays in.
Yeah.
Because again, like it's all about just hitting the lands in that matchup.
Yeah, exactly. I guess Kai can hit a Delver and then manipulate the graveyard a little bit against something like Tarmogoyf, Hooting Mandrills, or Dreadhorde, but...
Yeah, and then the life gain is important. Life gain is, I think, one of the interesting things about a lot of the cards that have been printed that are like really really annoying and that people hate is that life gain is just so much better than people give it credit for, and I think Wizards kind of like listened to the meme of like how bad life gain was and was just like, all right, we'll slap it on everything. It should be fine. And now it's like life gain is really really good. Especially in like the rug matchup, like just being able to exile one of their spells and exile a creature in game 2 is just it's really good. It's undervalued, I think.
Yeah, it's pretty tough when you're on, say, 12 and you're facing a Delver and you know it's a 4-turn clock. To get that extra turn is sometimes that one turn that you need to like try to find a removal spell.
Yeah, it's just like similar to when you have like a lot of mana and you want a Green Sun Zenith for a Knight of the Reliquary, but you know you're supposed to get a Scavenging Ooze and gain that one life. Yeah, no, the life gain is really really good. Like when I started playing, initially I think everyone thinks life gain is really awesome, and then they get to be the regular Magic player who just thinks life gain sucks.
Yep.
And I think I've got out of that phase now, and I'm like, life gain is bad if it's like the only thing the card does, but if it's stapled onto like anything else that's like playable, it just becomes so big.
Yeah, especially in these increments of 3, like with Oko and Uro.
Yeah, Uro is... I don't even know.
Yeah.
I don't know what they were thinking when they designed Uro. That's
I'm happy I'm not a Devil player that has to race an Uro in some games, because that seems pretty busted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, as far as the snow matchup, though, it's been a while, but I'd probably cut the Plague Engineers.
Okay.
And Collector Ouphe I would cut, even though, as you said, you can use it to, like, kind of keep them off Astrolab.
Yeah.
I don't actually have too much to bring in. Oh, I bring in the Chalices also. So, okay, so let's just go from the cards and bring me in. I'll bring in the Chokes, the Vraska, and the Chalices. And if they're, like, on snow with Terminus, and, like, Jaces and stuff, I'd bring in Gaddock Teeg. But if they're not, then Gaddock Teeg will stay out because he doesn't do anything.
Yeah.
And then, so I'd cut Plague Engineer and Collector Ouphe. And then other than that, I'd probably trim like 2 Once Upon a Time since mana is just not as important.
Okay.
The other cards, obviously, I've maybe cut 1 to 2 Swords to Plowshares also because they're pretty mediocre also. But you still want access to it.
Yeah, exactly.
You never know, they might be playing like Mentor or something dumb. And then, it's never going to be dead because of Uro and like Oko and stuff like that. So I definitely want to keep like 2 to 3 Swords to Plowshares.
Yeah, I think it's pretty key to having swords for when Uro hits the table, so you can hopefully swords it before it goes to the bin. I think one small thing to play around as well is if you know they're playing Karakas, is not allowing them to put a land in before you swords it, because if they put in Karakas, they can just return it to their hand, which is pretty busted.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But yeah, I think that swords unfortunately doesn't trade too well with things like Ice Fang, but you just need it for a card like Uro.
Yeah, and even sometimes like the control player will be expecting the Ice Fang to be able to block and protect the thing. So there will be times where like they have an Oko out and you can kill the Oko, and they play an Ice Fang and they have to force of will your Swords to Plowshares. Like that'll happen.
Yeah,
Because
that's very
they
true.
need to protect the Oko. So
Yeah, and I think
definitely it's not always the worst. Like it sucks when it's like just a clogged up board and you just are like, all right, well I guess I have to kill this Ice Fang. But it has its uses.
yeah, okay. Yeah, it's just annoying in that matchup where like big cards like Dead of Winter you just can't really play around.
Yeah.
You kind of have to go wide against the deck, which is a little bit unfortunate. This isn't a deck where you can really just protect one threat and hopefully get there. Sometimes Hex Drinker can do that, but I mean, getting protection from instants is great because of things like Swords to Plowshares, Abrupt Decay, but you have to kind of get it to 8 before you're getting it through Ice Fangs or Okos. And
Yeah, because Oko can still elk it, right? Like,
yeah, and unfortunately the counters are these level up counters. They're not +1/+1 counters, so it just becomes a 3/3. Unlike something like Skoos, where it might be bigger than a 3/3.
It becomes a level 3/3 elk.
Yeah. So Hexdrink is actually it's interesting because there's some matchups where I'm happy just to get it ASAP and start beating down with it, but there's some a little bit like Ooze where you kind of want to get it to a 4/4 and play around something like Bolt. When you can, so you might against Snow, you might be a little bit less aggressive with it, and try to get a stage where you can maybe green tons for it and then tick it up straight away, and then just hope they don't have the Oko.
Yep. Yeah, Hexdrinker's a lot of fun to play with, and the biggest reason why Hexdrinker's in the deck too is just like it just crushes any like mirror-y matchup, as well as Esper Vial, like because that deck is hard to beat, but Hexdrinker makes it a lot easier once you get it to level 8, and as decks go, I think next to like Elves, Maverick is one of the best decks at getting to 8 mana for just no reason.
Yeah.
Just with getting our own Gaia's Cradle.
Yeah, especially with Cradle in a deck. Cradle can do some pretty cool things. Especially if you go turn 1 Noble Hierarch or Birds off like a Bayou, and then you go turn 2 Hex Drinker, play Cradle, you can tick it up to 4 straight away, which is pretty absurd.
Yeah. Another good like turn 2 against like a lot of decks is being able to play Hexdrinker and Thalia.
Yeah. Yep.
Just good stuff overall.
I guess speaking of Esper Vial, that's a matchup that I've found pretty interesting because it grinds so well.
Yeah,
which
we're definitely the aggro deck in that matchup.
Yeah. So Esper Vial does have a pretty shaky mana base. So how I've been finding it is if you can attack Vial pretty early on and then try to wasteland them off a specific color, that can really help.
Yep.
And then Plague is pretty nice because it allows you to deal with cards like Baleful Strix without spending an actual card. They do go pretty wide on the board, especially once Soul Herder comes into it. And Jailer is a pretty good card for them, but if you can attack Vial early on and kind of stop the funnel of creatures that they can deploy through both Vial and their mana, then sometimes they kind of can't cast the Palace Jailer, which is pretty nice.
I think the biggest. You're right that the best way to deal with Esper Vial is attacking their mana, because I think something to keep in mind is that as much as the creatures in Esper Vial are obviously very good, a lot of them are super cool, and their ability to get whichever ones they want, like with Recruiter of the Guard and stuff like that, is very good. But everything that they play is overcosted, and playing Recruiter of the Guard without a Vial out is very, that's their whole turn, right?
Yeah.
So if you're able to keep it so that they can only play one thing a turn, it's a lot easier for us to build our board faster. And then in terms of Plague Engineer, I know there were some people who were talking about Stoneforge Mystic versus Plague Engineer and how they do in the Esper Vial matchup. and I am firmly on the side of Plague Engineer because when I was playing Green-White Maverick, I was playing the Stoneforge package, and as much as Jitte is obviously like, it's better if you can get counters on it. In my experience, you just never are gonna get counters on it in the Esper Vial matchup. Like they just have so many things that can stop you.
Yeah.
Like with Flicker Wisp, whatever the legendary 4-drop creature is. I
Venser.
don't remember. Yeah, Venser.
Shaper Savant.
Yeah, and then like Palace Jailer, and just like being able to block something in Vial in a Charming Prince or anything like that. Like you never get counters on it in my experience.
Yep.
So I think Plague Engineer is a lot better just in the fact that it's always gonna do something, and it is still just a 2/2 death touch that they have to deal with. So
Yeah, it's always interesting as well how they go about playing Meddling Mage and what they name first.
yeah, I'm always surprised they name like Green Suns.
Yeah, they name Green Suns.
Instead of Swords to Plowshares.
Yeah.
Like I don't know. I don't know about that. If I was like I played humans in Modern for like a few months, and in my experience, you normally want to name the removal spell.
Yeah, because then the next one can come down and name Green Suns, and then you're protected both ways,
Yeah, exactly.
which is pretty nice. But I think that Kai is pretty nice in this matchup because it does deal with Vial.
Oh yeah.
And on the play as early as turn 2, which is great. I mean, if you can go turn 1 Noble, then go turn 1 Vial, and you go turn 2 Kaya, it's just such a different game.
It's nuts. Kaya, I could talk about Kaya for minutes. I think this card is really, really good. In almost every matchup, it's awesome. And I think anyone who's playing black who's not playing Kaya should be playing Kaya. Like, because you don't even like think about the amount of things that it hits, and even when you have it in a matchup where it doesn't have any good hits, like it normally knocks at least a turn off your clock with the ultimate.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
because
it's crazy.
Even if a deck isn't using their graveyard as a specific resource, they're still filling it with cards most of the time.
Yeah, exactly. So you can definitely like the ult it'll happen on the third turn that Kaya's down, and like at the lowest amount it'll do is like 6 damage normally, because they will have Force of Will, or you'll Swords to Plowshare or something, and then you'll get to eat 4 cards from the graveyard. It's so good.
Yeah, so I have a small list here. So 1-drops include Astrolabe, Mox Diamond, Crow Mox, Aether Vial, Chalice of the Void, Mother of Runes, not really seeing play, Delver, Endless One, Exploration, any sort of Mana Dork in Gilded Goose, Birds of Paradise, Noble Hierarch. It's pretty great against Elves and also Goblins. Food tokens, which doesn't seem great, but if you can keep an Oko of actually creating 3/3s, that's pretty great.
Yeah.
And then some cards from the graveyard. You have Loam, Punishing Fire, Uro. You can kind of help break down a Dreadhorde, Snapcaster, and then obviously against things like a slow Dredge or Reanimator deck, it's pretty phenomenal.
Yeah, no. The one that I think a lot of people forget is Merit Lash.
Merit Lash, yes.
It's so crazy. I've gotten to do it a couple times now. That's another side thing. I know Maverick always is known to be like, it just crushes depths. But this deck, like the build that I have right here, I've not lost to depths once. The matchup is just it feels like a bye. Like it feels unfair. Like almost every match against depths, I'll be like holding like Caracas, Kaya, and like swords, and I'll just have a night out or something, and it's just like I still had all these.
Yeah, it is. I feel like we have to get pretty unlucky for them to win, which is kind of like how I feel with some of our bad matchups. Like when I beat Elves, I kind of feel like my opponent stumbled more than I was able to kind of control the game on my own.
Yeah.
Which I know there's some draws where I've had like I haven't drawn the white source early on for them to just turn 2 Merit Lage and then win turn 3, but
yeah,
usually just
with the 3 paths, like just having 7 1-drop Panthers to Merit Lage is just insane.
Yeah. So if you're expecting, I guess we can move on to depths here.
Sure.
Oh, actually, sorry. Let's just quickly go back to Esper Vial with boarding.
So I'd bring in the paths. I'd bring in the chokes, or at least one of them.
Okay. Yeah.
and I bring in the Vraska. So it's similar to like the Delver matchup.
Yeah.
And then I would be cutting. The difference is that we cut like 3 Thalias, maybe 4, because even though they have a fair amount of non-creatures, the problem is they play Karakas, and you never know if you're going to draw the Thalia when they have a Karakas.
Yeah.
And if you do, it's just the worst card in your deck by far.
Yeah, sadly.
So yeah, you basically cut all the Thalias. You keep Ouphe in because obviously the main game plan is just keep them off Vial. And then I'd probably trim like a Once Upon a Time or something like that.
Yeah. That's fair enough. I think the paths are great, especially if you can keep them in response to like a bounce effect, then they're not getting that that extra value off that. They usually run one of each planes, but it might be a pretty nice sequence where, because we're on a Wasteland deck, they might go for the basics early on to make sure that they can hold out their mana, and then by the time you're pathing things, they might not actually have the basics left in their deck, which is kind of cool.
Yeah. And a lot of the times it comes down to like, yes, it sucks to give them the mana when we're trying to deny it, but it would suck much worse for them to have a Soul Herder that, you know, lives for the turn.
Yeah.
That's how we lose the game right there. Is Soul Herder living, or like anything like that, or like a Karakas Fencer combo, and the 3-drop legendary guy,
Baron.
Yeah, him. Like
Yeah.
if he lives, then they have like Karakas or, you know, something to bounce their things. Like that's obviously a pretty difficult to beat value engine.
What sort of cards are you expecting from their sideboard?
I don't actually know what their sideboard is. I feel like they don't have to bring in too much. Like,
Yeah.
I can't imagine they actually have. I mean, I'm gonna look at their deck list.
I'm gonna assume like sometimes they run Rest in Peace or Remorseful Cleric to deal with graveyards.
Yeah, I could see Remorseful Cleric. I don't think they would bring in Rest in Peace, or at least if they did, I'd be all right with that.
Yep. Yeah.
Let's see, what do they have? Fatal Push apparently.
Okay.
And some of them are running. Yeah, they obviously they have their own Plague Engineers.
Yes.
Which are
Yeah.
important to keep in mind.
Yep. I wouldn't expect Gilded Drake.
I think they would definitely bring that in.
Okay. Yeah.
And I would expect it for sure.
Okay.
Like, because basically any time they're against a creature deck, they're gonna bring it in because it's crazy good, right? Like, oh, Teferi, that's the other card that bounces things for them.
Yes.
Yeah. Like Gilded Drake plus Teferi is insane. It's
that's fair enough. And of course also the Charming Prince wording.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so stuff like that, definitely. Yeah, I would expect Gilded Drake for sure.
Yeah, cool. Okay. So the extra pass definitely helped because you're probably expecting a fair amount of creatures coming in from the board.
Yeah, I think I know a lot of people were sticking with like 2 paths a lot, including me, but the 3rd path is just so important, and they come in like so many big matchups right now. They're very good. Definitely recommend.
Yeah, because it is pretty tough if you once, but you know you want to find removal, and you just see like 2 paths and Abrupt Decay, and you're like, they go into the bottom.
Yeah,
but,
and obviously like those are feel bads, but it's definitely like it's important to just, you know, remember that that's gonna happen, and if you didn't have once, like it's not who's to say you wouldn't have like shuffled or whatever or anything like that.
Yeah, that's
like,
very true.
I'm not sure. I don't like the line of thinking where it's like, oh, I would have drawn these cards. Like,
yeah, no, that's very true.
Yeah, I try and avoid that for the most part.
Yeah.
With any sort of like cantrip based, like or things like that, where it's like, oh, I'm casting Once Upon a Time, and there's my Planeswalker. Like, yeah, it's obvious. Like you can get upset about it or whatever and be like, gosh, like crap. But I wouldn't like use it and be like, yeah, this is why I'm not gonna run Once Upon a Time.
Yeah, I like that view a lot. Okay, so we just went from Esper Vial, and we were talking about a different deck. Depths, yeah, cool.
Yeah.
So I guess there's Turbo, which is probably seeing more play now than the slower versions with Mox Diamond.
For sure, yeah. And Turbo is definitely the more difficult one for us to beat because they can just do a turn 1 a lot of the time.
Yeah, I think one card that I'm usually scared of, especially from the board, is Safekeeper.
Yeah. That one's, like, it definitely makes it harder, but you just have to accept that, yeah, you gotta kill it. Like, it sucks, but we gotta kill it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good card. And then decays obviously are annoying. Like you play a Knight of the Reliquary and you think you're gonna, win, because you played a knight and it
Yeah.
lived, and then they decay it before they make their 2020 or things like that.
Yep.
But yeah, those are pretty much the only big cards.
Yeah, I think main board we're pretty set, which is nice. It's not a deck we have to overly sideboard for, which
Yeah,
is really nice.
exactly. We're already good main board, and then post board we have 3 paths. And Vraska, I bring in Vraska because the last time I remember losing to depths was like in a paper tournament, and I just didn't draw a threat like ever. This isn't like obviously the actual like reason why I bring in Vraska, but it's like a good example of, I find if we don't do something, like we have to be able to win the game. We can't just be like stonewalled by like their vampire hex mages and reclaimers and stuff.
Yeah.
So I find Vraska's, it's just a really good card in terms of like answering their like pithing needles and stuff.
Yeah.
Which is another good target for Kaya.
Oh yeah, well, I'll add it to the list.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a thing that a lot of people who aren't a fan of Kaya, like they don't look at you got to look at the other decks and be like, oh yeah, like this deck has like 2 different targets for it. This deck has like 3. Like if you look at lands, it's like, wow, Kaya just beats their whole deck. That's pretty crazy. Like Mox Diamond, Exploration, Merit Lodge, and Loam and Punishing Fire. It's like, holy crap. Yeah, so I bring in those 4, and then I think I probably cut Ouphe and then 3 Thalias, but I might cut 4 Thalias depending on my mood at the time.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. Ouphe can hit things like Lotus Petal, but
Yeah,
I think that's a little bit. Usually when they're playing the Lotus Petal, it's probably an
it's
early.
Like right? Yeah.
Yeah. So you got to be pretty lucky for Ouphe to have a good impact on the game.
Yep, and also Thalia makes it harder for us to hold up paths and stuff, so that's why Thalia
Yep.
is out there. Also, I guess they aren't running Plague Engineer for most lists, but it definitely can be run by them, and I've seen it a lot. So that's a card that you want to like be like ready, expect basically. And Thalia sucks obviously against Plague Engineer, so that's another reason to cut it.
Yeah. Also against a deck that I'm assuming also has access to Caracas, so if Thalia is a real pain, they do have multiple ways to grab it.
Yeah, they have the 4 crop rotation and all the Sylvan Scribes and stuff.
Yeah. So I guess post board, if your opponent goes to make a 2020 in their end step and you have a swords and path, do you usually swords first in case they have a Not of This World, so that they don't gain the 20 and then you have the path as the kind of better removal spell?
I think I wouldn't. It would depend. Like I think Depths is one of the decks where you can actually really reliably tell what's in your opponent's hand. So it would probably depend on like if I think they have a Not of This World, and so first off there's that like variable of like if I think they have an answer for it, and then there's the how many lands do they have, because sometimes giving them the extra land sucks, right? Like Depths' deck, especially once they've made the 2020, they often have like 1 land.
Yeah.
So even if it means giving them an extra like 4 turns or whatever, keeping them down on lands and letting you just develop, because the extra couple turns don't matter if you have an active knight, and like not to mention the draw steps for you are also still crazy. Like most of our deck is good, so it depends on a lot of the state of the game. But
Yeah.
if they're fine on mana, then yeah, I would probably try and get them to counter the swords, because yeah, like I guess it's kind of a question of if I can just like kill them next turn if they counter the swords and then I path.
Yeah.
Or if not.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So I don't think there's like a good blanket answer for that one.
Yeah, it's always interesting as well when they start off with a pretty aggressive like Elvish Reclaimer kind of start, and they start beating you down, and you're not too sure when you should pull the plug on a swords or a path, especially if you only have 1.
Oh yeah, I think I would almost always just do it the turn that it comes down.
Like, yeah, okay, just no fuss.
Yeah, well, just because like if like so I guess if we're leaving it alive, we're just hoping they already have the combo in their hand. Like so I feel like it's better just to get rid of it, because they're probably relying on it to get half the combo or something like that. And then yeah, like if you leave it, you still have to answer it in terms of like a bigger creature or something. So I would definitely be I think I might be too liberal with my swords. I don't think so, because obviously if I did, I wouldn't be doing it. But you definitely, I would kill it as soon as it comes down because I don't want them to be able to get whichever land they want.
Yeah. Okay.
Obviously, it depends on like again the game state. Like if they have a vampire, hex mage, and a depths on board, I'm not gonna swords the reclaimer. But yeah, if it's like their turn one play, I would definitely kill it.
Yeah. Okay. That's awesome. Speaking of Elvish Reclaimer, I guess we can move over to a deck like Elves,
Yeah.
which obviously isn't the easiest deck for Maverick to deal with, especially game one. Plague Engineer
Yeah.
helps,
Yep.
but yeah, their ability to go wide is really nice. They obviously have some pretty fast ways to win through Natural Order or a really big Green Suns. So swords is always a pretty big resource. Luckily, we have in with the Black Splash a pretty nice removal suite where it's not just a green-white deck where you're relying on the 4 swords.
Yeah, no, and Plague Engineer is obviously really good. I saw a tweet like last week about how tribal decks have like adapted to Plague Engineer, and while that is like obviously they know to expect it now, I think it's still just nuts. And specifically for a deck like Maverick, I don't think we need to worry about any like I know there were people talking about other sweepers like one person mentioned Deluge in the Discord, and I don't think I would ever see myself running that. The only card that I would run over Plague Engineer is Zealous Persecution, and
Yeah.
that would have to be the sideboard.
Yeah.
And I do love Zealous Persecution. Like
Yeah.
I played that card before Plague Engineer was printed when I was just playing green, white, black, and I was splashing black just for Thought Seizes and Zealous Persecution in the board.
Okay.
So I feel like Plague Engineer is still really, really good in all of the like tribal matchups. I feel like any time I'm against Elves and I draw Plague Engineer, I'm probably gonna win that game. And the same as against Goblins, and things like that. So
Yeah.
I think that's basically how Elves comes down to for me right now. Is it's just like I hope I find Plague Engineer, and if I don't, this game is gonna be really hard.
Yeah. Kaya is also fairly good.
Yeah.
It really depends on how well they build out their board before you exile their first creature, because then they can probably kill it on the swing back. But
Yeah, and I think play draw is also really big for Kaya's value.
yeah. But Zealous is an interesting one because I've definitely been testing Zealous over third Plague Engineer in the board, because it is pretty good against Elves, where you can also hit Dryad Arbor and Wirewood Symbiote.
Yeah, those are big ones.
And then against a deck like Esper Vial, they do have a fair amount of X1s that are different creatures. So you have Bird and Baleful Strix, you have Recruiter as a human, you have Flicker Wisp as an elemental. There's definitely a few variations where you kind of just wish you had that Zealous Persecution.
Yeah, and I think the best example of a deck where Zealous Persecution is like noticeably better is Esper Vial. I think against Elves and Goblins, I think most of the things that we say are gonna apply to Goblins also. I think even though you're gonna have some situations where your Plague Engineer doesn't kill their whole board, if you just name Elf, they can't win, right?
Yeah.
Like yes, it's unfortunate that they have their Wirewood Symbiote and their Dryad Arbors alive, but other than Natural Order, which is obviously is something you have to try and play around.
Yeah.
If you just name Elf, you're just good to go. So I feel like the difference between Plague Engineer and Zealous Persecution in these tribal matchups where they have the cards that aren't the same tribe as the the main deck, it's more of it feels better to have Zealous Persecution, and sometimes you'll just be like a little bit disappointed that you have Plague Engineer, but I think you still win that game that you play the Plague Engineer and name Elf. Or if they did like one of those things where they'll fetch like 2 Dryad Arbors, name Dryad there, right, and you're still gonna win.
Yeah.
As much as like that's I think it's very much like people are like, oh, it would be so good if I had Zealous Persecution here, and I think a lot of Magic players tend to kind of let that feeling like guide them too much. Where
Yeah.
they're like, this is I want to do this because that it felt bad that time. It's like, well, it's gonna feel bad sometimes.
Yeah.
But did you win?
Exactly. And I reckon I've done that a lot. Where Plague Engineer is going to win me 80% of the games, and Zealous is going to win maybe like 82% of the games. It doesn't really matter. They're probably we're going to win the game anyway.
Yeah,
But
and the big difference obviously is that Plague Engineer is it's just so much better as the floor is so much higher for Plague Engineer.
yeah,
Like even like game 1 against Rug Delver, Plague Engineers, it's still fine. Even when it's bad, it's still a 2/2 death touch.
Yeah.
So I think a card like that. I probably won't be trying stuff like that unless like I start having a lot of trouble with like Esper Vial, or if Elves keeps picking up so that I see it more often. I still barely see it even in leagues.
Yeah.
So I don't think I would bring it like up my board wipes.
Okay.
And if I did, there's definitely an argument though for Zealous Persecution, especially it costing 2 mana. So like you don't have those hands where you have like 2 Plague Engineers and you can't get to 3 mana because you're like you have to wasteland them and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's fair enough. One thing as well is that if players have been changing their lists to play around Plague by playing like instead of the 4 nobles playing like a Birds of Paradise, or going for a Dryad Arbor early on instead, then obviously Zealous is pretty good there. But yeah, Elves is an interesting one. I do like how they've moved towards the Elvish Reclaimer builds over Nether Sentinel, and have started playing things like Cabal Pit in the main deck to have an answer for Plague Engineer, which is pretty cool.
I remember seeing Cabal Pit, and I was really surprised. But I like Cabal Pit. That's a good card.
Yeah, which is interesting because for them it's not too easy to turn on Threshold.
Yeah, and not only that, like their deck is green heavy, right? Like Cabal Pit is gonna be really awkward in a lot of those draws.
Yeah, especially when you're already playing full Cradle.
Yeah, exactly. 4 Cradle and 2 Dryad Arbors. So like we think Maverick has like bad awkward draws. I can only imagine how much fun it is to play Elves and just draw like 3 Cradles and stuff like
that. So boarding for Elves, I'm going to assume the 3 parts. I think even though you're giving them a land some of the time, the resource of an elf for them or a creature is just so much more than an actual mana source in a basic land.
Yeah, and one thing I didn't realize before is that they are very cheap on their basics. Like, I thought being like a basically mono green deck they would have more forests, but it looks like most lists are only running 2. So
yeah,
it's
which
often
is
that path will be fine.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of the time they will go for it early on because they probably don't want to be not wastelanded out of the game, but it's nice to build out that mana base that you can definitely work with every turn from 1 to 3.
Yep. And then so for the rest of the things I bring in against Elves, I'd bring in Vraska because it's just good. Teeg, and I think I would bring in Chalices also.
Yeah.
And then I'd cut 4th Alia, Collector Ouphe.
I think this is a great, pretty easy switch for the Ouphe and the Teeg.
Yeah, for sure. And then it's kind of like a toss-up. I wouldn't cut any Once Upon a Time because we really want to find Plague Engineer.
Yes.
So maybe trim like a Knight of the Reliquary or something like that. Or if, depending on the situation, I'd cut like the Vraska. But I think a lot of the times the way that we win in this game is like Questing Beast or a Hex Drinker gets to max level. So Knight of the Reliquary, as good as it is in like keeping them off of getting enough mana, it's definitely not like the all-star in this game, in this matchup.
Yeah,
so
that's very true.
Pretty happy to trim one. And yeah, I like. Other than that, you could trim one. Knight of Autumn doesn't have too many targets.
Yeah, I haven't seen Sylvan Library out of Elves for a long time.
Yeah, I remember. Like that's why my instinct is always to leave it in because I've seen it, but it's like you look at lists now, they're just not running it, so it's definitely an easy cut. But yeah, that's why I think I kind of like when I was first going through the list there, picking cards I'd cut, I just kind of like went right over Knight of Autumn because normally there's something for it, but not in this matchup now.
Yeah, exactly. I played against Vince Pleasant Kenobi last night in my league when he's on Elves, and luckily I got Plague Engineer in game one. But in game two, I was just trying to find it so badly, and I couldn't get there. But
Yeah, yeah.
it's just such a huge card that even with library out, which is pretty nice, it's always interesting how aggressive I am with library against a deck like Elves, because they can.
Should be.
Yeah, I definitely should be. But there are games where they just swing with all their creatures for like 3 turns, and you just don't have enough blockers.
Yeah.
But I think if you're really trying to dig for something like Plague or Gaddock, Teeg or Green Suns, then you do have to be pretty aggressive with it, and you're probably taking the full 8 within the first 2 draws at least.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Yeah. I guess, is there any changes you would make against Goblins?
I think Teeg doesn't come in, and Chalices don't come in.
Okay.
So then, and Collector Ouphe would stay in, and Knight of Bottom and Knight of the Reliquary would stay in.
Yeah.
Before that would go.
Yeah, cool. Okay. Because, again, probably a deck, a little bit like Esper Vial, that if you can shut off their Vial early on, and then hopefully go after their mana, it's pretty good. But these...
Yeah, Goblins is really mana hungry. That's something that, like, I think when I was first starting to play Legacy, I didn't, like, recognize it, because you see Goblins and you feel like it's like a low to the ground, like aggressive deck, but they're running a lot of expensive cards. So
yeah,
you play it very similar to Vial, where like against Esper Vial, where you attack their Vial and attack their mana.
I know that Eli Goblin Lucky 1 has spoken about the mana base as well, and how you're running 4 wastelands, 4 ports, so something like double red doesn't often come up in the very early turns. So if you can hit a Vial.
Caverns too. So,
yeah.
Like, Wasteland is really good, and hitting the Vials slow them down a lot and make it harder for them.
Yeah, just another reason why Kaya is so good.
Yeah.
Especially against these turbo builds that are running the full like Skirk Prospectors, just trying to get to Muxus as soon as possible.
Yeah, Skirk Prospector is a card that I like, and I actually haven't. I've only played against Goblins like once or twice now since the print of all those new cards, and I've never seen a Muxus like hit the battlefield. So,
oh, lucky you!
Yeah.
It is an awful time.
Like I've been able to attack their mana, but yeah, that's another great reason to attack their mana, is because if that card does hit the battlefield, you probably just lose. So keeping them off 6 mana is really, really important.
Yeah. Do you think it's worth it? So let's say, I guess it doesn't really depend on the game, but are you in any way a little more fragile with your swords if you have Plague Engineer and Kai to deal with some of the early threats? Just because of their lords and creatures that are bigger than X ones. I assume if they play a turn 1 Lucky, you're obviously trying to deal with it. But if they have kind of a slower start of like, Mogwai Marshals and maybe some like Matrons, you're probably trying to keep your swords to deal with a better creature.
Yeah, I think Swords to Plowshares, I wouldn't use it on any of their like mediocre goblins. I'd pretty much only be swordsing lackeys, creator makers if they have something that I care about.
Yep.
Like if I have something I don't want to die, and then things like their like Sling Gang Lieutenant or the lords. The only time I would ever consider swordsing a Mogwai Marshal is if like I have lethal on board. Like.
Yep.
Otherwise, I'm just not gonna do it. Like, yeah. I don't care. Or I guess if they have like a munitions expert trigger on the stack, then I might do it.
Yeah, that's nice. A little trick.
But other than that, swords. I feel like it's not really that I'm more like careful with it. It's just more. There's only a certain few cards of goblins that are worth it, really.
Yeah, which is tough. There's no real one card that I just want as swords. They're all just like kind of mediocre goblins, but as a force together, it's like sum of the parts is just so much better that you kind of have to keep them off some of their goblins so they don't have all of them as a resource.
Yeah, it definitely depends on the situation.
Speaking of tribal, I guess Eldrazi's still a pretty big deck online. I haven't seen too much of it, But
Yeah, I think it's definitely ticking
it's
down in popularity.
yeah, I feel like it's there, but
Yeah.
not as much as it used to be. Eldrazi again, probably a little bit like Depths, where we just are probably favored in game one, especially with Knight in the deck and also Wasteland.
Yeah, it's one of the ones that were favored, but it's definitely uh it's close. It's closer than I want it to be.
Hmm.
Uh, I find I lose a fair amount when like if I can't get a Knight of the Reliquary like on the battlefield. Uh, and the other thing with Eldrazi is their best draws are just unbeatable. Like
Yeah.
it's absolutely crazy. Like double Eldrazi Mimic into Thought-Knot Seer. That on its own is often enough to just win.
Yeah.
Like
Even Chalice on the
uh,
play can be really punishing if you don't have something like Decay.
yeah. So I do think we're still favored, but I think it's a lot closer than people think because people like it's similar in the way people think about the matchup as like Maverick crushes it, and we do, but it's closer to like a 55% for us, whereas like depths right now with this list at least feels like it's got to be like 70%. Like it's nuts. It's so good. So yeah, Eldrazi, and also they can like depending on how many dismembers and like ballistas and stuff they run, they can definitely increase their value. So, like in running Umazawa's Jite and stuff like that. So
Yeah. I
I
find it. Sorry, you go.
I definitely like. I'm still happy to see Eldrazi, but I'm always just like, ah, am I just gonna get like destroyed? Like it, it feels a lot more like that happens a fair amount.
Yeah, I find it's probably one of the matchups where I use my life total as a resource the most. So in the late game with smashes, they can be pretty scary because it's like, one smasher and you're gone. But it is really nice when you can go like, turn one noble, turn two knight, and then just know you're gonna like wasteland them and have like a massive knight. And
Yeah,
hopefully play some other creatures. But yeah,
yeah.
it's always
Like turn two knights, awesome. I think other than like without turn two knight is when it feels really bad. Or if they just like you play turn two knight and they just dismember and then play a thought nuts here the next turn. Like
yeah.
they have a lot of ways to just mess with our day.
Yeah, definitely. How would you, I guess, board with this version? I assume the Thalias are probably the first pick.
Yeah, Thalias and probably Collector Ouphe
Yep.
would be the cards that go, and then we're just bringing in the three paths and the Vraska. So, depending on how you like, whichever one you dislike more, between Thalia and Ouphe, you could bring in one of them.
Yeah, I
But
guess maybe
other than
if
that, we don't have much.
yeah, thinking of some cards they might bring in. Gaddock Teeg is always nice if you think of all as dust, but I think by then it's probably a little bit too late anyway. Collector Ouphe at least interacts with Walking Blister, Ratchet Bomb, Jide if they're playing it.
Yeah, no, I think it's probably right for the most of the time to bring in Collector Ouphe, especially with the way that they're building it now with Jites, um, and
Damn
stuff
them.
like that. Yeah,
Yeah, I haven't seen Jide in a long time.
yeah, it's it's really it's not near as popular now that there's Oko and Death and Taxes isn't around and stuff like that. So
Yep.
it's too bad. It's a cool Magic card.
Yeah. Leylines. What sort of matchups would you be bringing the Leylines against?
Uh, let's hold on. uh, I'd be bringing them in against Hogak and
Yep.
against any sort of storm deck. I
Okay.
could bring them in against Dredge and Reanimator and lands, and any Echo of Eons, like any
Yeah,
deck like that, like
definitely.
the Karn one.
I think Echo is definitely a reason that I've moved towards always bringing them in against Tez, most likely,
Yeah, I
because
always
of the
bring them
Echo
against Tez
lines.
for sure. Yeah, and the other thing is, I feel like I've played Ant a fair amount. I haven't played Tez, but I feel like it's likely that a lot of the hands that they keep, they're just expecting to be able to just go LED Echo.
Hmm.
So being able to go turn 0 Leyline against that, I think makes them keep suboptimal hands that they wouldn't otherwise keep.
Yeah,
So I
that's
feel
very
like
true.
value. But yeah, so other than that, pretty much just any like combo that relies on the graveyard. I
Yeah.
wouldn't bring them in like for value, like against uh, like Strifo pile or something. I wouldn't bring them in.
Yep. What about
Uh,
full color
I
loam?
that one I know that a lot of people don't like it, but I've brought in one Leyline of the Void before, and just kind of like if I draw it, then that's unfortunate. But if it's in my hand, I just win. Like
Yeah,
because
that's
it
fair
can be
enough.
really good. Um, but I don't. You don't want to mulligan to it, and you don't want to have to draw multiples of it.
Yeah, that's very true.
But yeah, so I wouldn't. I would either bring in 0 or 1 against Loam.
Okay.
I definitely wouldn't bring in more than that because yeah, like that's a matchup where it's very much each person just plays a threat, and you just want to have the extra threat or something like
Yeah.
because it's as close to a mirror as it can be without it actually just being a mirror. Like you're both just tap out, play big creature or planeswalker or whatever, and we both have removal. Like it feels very similar.
Yeah.
Um,
The Mox Diamond starts are usually the ones that I'm a little bit more scared of, especially if they can Mox Diamond into Chalice to turn off our mana acceleration, or Mox Diamond into Bob, and I just don't have an answer for it.
yeah, Bob is a card that you definitely have to kill every turn, like
Mm.
every whenever it comes down. Like again, whenever I say you should always do something, that's not always. It's just most of the time.
Yeah. Uh,
There's pretty much you can pretty much construct a situation where no matter what like the weird stipulation is that you shouldn't do something, like you can always do that. But most of the time you should be swordsing Dark Confidant whenever it hits the battlefield.
yeah. These Loam decks are interesting because they've kind of moved towards blue, which allows them to have Uro, Oko, and they've been running Baleful Strix.
Yeah, I see that. I haven't played against Loam since they've been running Baleful Strix, but that's lame.
Yeah, Strix is probably I'm probably more happy to see Strix than Ice Fang because usually I see Ice Fang at the last moment before I
Yeah.
scream. But yeah, it's really interesting to see a lot more value coming out of the deck.
Yeah, they're very. Yeah, it's too bad that they're not playing Liliana the Veil anymore because that card is cool, but
Yeah.
Oko is just better and Uro is just better.
Yeah. Yeah, because I guess without punishing fire as well, there's less incentivization to you're less incentivized to bring in Leyline, and for the most part, they don't run too many loams.
Yeah, that's the other. I know it's called Loam, but like a lot of lists are only running 1 or 2, right?
Yeah,
Like I
it's
think 2 is the base. Like that's what most people are running. So
yep,
I'm not gonna bring in Leylines for that, especially in my list again where I have Kaya's and Skoos. So
yeah, exactly. I think it's a case of if you do have one slot, you could bring in a Leyline just for that kind of. If it's in my opening, that's great. But if I draw it late game, I can at least cast it.
yeah,
Yeah, which is another nice little benefit of playing black is that you can actually cast your ley lines if you draw them.
yeah, and it does come up. Like it, there are times where you make it to that turn and you're like, oh wait, I have double black.
uh, what about this build for the mirror?
I played the mirror I think only like twice with this build, and it feels pretty good. Like free paths are really good, Vraska's are really good. It's similar boarding where we just cut 4th alleys and we bring in the 3 paths in Vraska.
Yeah,
Um,
I think this is one reason why I like the board because a lot of this is just moving kind of sections of the board in instead of like 1 1 1 1 and then bring in 1 1 1 1. It's like we have 3 parts. Like we have one
yeah,
Vraska which we will probably see in some of the mid range decks, but it's just nice to have these kind of clumps of cards instead of like 15 one-ofs that you have to precisely bring in for certain matchups, which is kind of nice
yeah,
because it
I
makes
think
boarding really easy, and you're also bringing in just really powerful cards for each matchup.
yeah, that's what I was thinking. Is like it's very much like well, path is a good card, so I want multiples of it. Like I don't want to just bring in one because oh it's good in this meta and I'll like hedge against other things. It's like no, this card's good. I'm gonna run 3 in my board, and I'm gonna bring them in against a lot of decks. Um, but yeah, I think in terms of the mirror, we're probably reasonable. I think we're pretty well set up actually. Now that like the more I look at it, we have the tools to beat like everything.
Yeah,
We get to run Plague Engineer, which is really good. We have decays for if they're on Stoneforge, like as well as Knight of Autumn and Collector Ouphe.
Kaya has a bunch of
And
targets as well.
yeah, Kai has a bunch of targets, and again, just 7 1-drop removal spells is just like the magic number of 1-drop removal spells, where you always have one, and you're often gonna have multiples, and they're always good. Like the only time where it's like awkward is you're obviously not gonna path a mana dork, but
Yeah.
just I think a lot of the times I think people are too anxious to swords mana dorks in general in the mirror. Like it depends, obviously, but there are definitely times where I think people have swords to plowshares, like my noble hierarch, and it's just like, okay, that's fine. Like I have more lands or things like that, or a green sun zenith that I'll just get a dryad arbor,
Yeah.
and then you just don't have a swords for Knight of the Reliquary, right? Like, so
Exactly.
it depends. I think, and one nice thing about having the 7 1-drop removal spells is often you can often kill the mana dork and then still have a path for like the actual threat while still gaining the tempo advantage.
Yeah. Exactly. It always depends, and I guess you don't really have too much information, but there are times where I'll swords the noble, or I'll just say to myself, I'm going to swords the threat that they're going to accelerate
Play
into.
Yeah.
But then it's rough if you do go after the noble, and then as you said, if they untap and play like birds and then green suns for 0, you're like, well, okay, they have all the mana in the
Yeah,
world.
exactly. And the thing is, right, we don't have discards. We don't know.
Yeah.
So you're gonna get those situations. Whereas if you hold the swords, if they don't play a threat, then you're fine. And if they do play a threat, then you have the swords. But it can get a little dicey when like they go turn 1 dork and then you don't use your swords, and then they like wasteland you and stuff and like use their mana advantage like that. But I think a rule of thumb for that would be if you have a mana dork of your own, you should just play it and not swords theirs. But if you don't, then you should probably swords to plowshares their dork because you want to use your mana. So
Yeah. Exactly.
I think that's a reasonable way to think of it.
Yeah. Hextrig has always been nice for me in the mirror, but the one card that
Yeah.
I've always loathed is Blast Zone from my opponent. It's usually pretty good.
Like it's good. It's definitely good, and it depends on like when like if they are able to just fetch it with their Knight of the Reliquary later, it can be pretty bad for us. But it doesn't happen too often, and often like they'll draw it early, and it's just a colorless land, right? Like
Yeah.
the other good thing about Blast Zone is that although it does kill Hexdrinker when it just hits the battlefield, even for if you want to kill anything else like Knight of the Reliquary or like any bigger creature, is you get multiple turns of notice of like, hey, this is gonna happen, so you get to prepare for it. I haven't been too scared, but obviously, yeah, there's games where you play 2 dorks and a Hexdrinker, and then they just Blast Zone, but I think that doesn't happen too often.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I think in the builds where I've been running Plague Engineer, I've kind of felt like it takes the role of Blast Zone as well, that you're not needing both in the deck.
Yeah, I think Plague Engineer is really good. I'm gonna, that's a hot take right there. Plague Engineer is above average magic card.
Yeah. Did you want to mention anything else on this one before we move to your green-white deck?
I think everyone should play Kaya. I think that's the biggest thing.
Yeah, definitely.
I think, yeah, everyone should at least. Yeah, no, everyone should just play Kaya. It's absolutely nuts. The only matchup where it's like that's like popular. There's 2 matchups right now that are popular that like Kaya's not the best in, and it's like Show and Tell and Doomsday.
Yeah.
And like just remind yourself that Kaya is nuts in like 80% of other matchups, and even in those matchups when you draw it, it still cuts a turn off the clock. Like it's still fine. It's still gonna deal 8 damage to them in 2 turns.
Yeah.
And obviously, yeah, that's not where you want to be, right? But you can just board it out after, and it's fine.
It's actually pretty interesting against Storm players who play out their Lotus Petals and LEDs to play around Thalia.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah, exactly.
sometimes you do get the chance to Kaya an LED, which is just something you don't really think about. But it happened with me with when I was playing Force of Vigor. Because my opponent was aggressively playing out his or their mana accelerants, I was able to like Force of Vigor an LED when they didn't want the LED to be sacrificed, which is really nice.
Yeah.
But I only brought in the Force because I saw Defense Grid and I had Mindbreak traps. But it was just like they played it out and passed, and I was like, "Ooh, okay, this is interesting." But
Yeah.
obviously with Kaya, it's just another little advantage, which is kind of cool.
Yeah. So that's the big one. uh, I think everyone should run Kaya. And yeah, other than that, like I think this deck is just really good right now, and it's got it doesn't lose to anything like super hard except like Snoko,
Yeah,
which you barely see anymore, which is awesome. But I will admit that yes, when you do see it, you're probably gonna lose because it's just no matter how good of a draw I seem to have against Snoko, it just doesn't matter.
yeah, they just catch up. It's
Yeah.
it's pretty tough just the amount of value they have. They just get to outgrind you pretty easily. It's always tough when they have like three Ice Fangs on the board and an Oko, and they still have 7 cards in hand. You're like, what? I have 2 cards in hand and nothing on board.
Yeah, exactly. So I think if you're not expecting much Snoko, you should definitely play that Abzan list.
Yeah, cool.
And then yeah, for as far as this list, like I threw this together like today just because I wanted to see like what I would do if I was playing white right now.
Yeah,
Um,
and to be fair, it's pretty close to the other build. Um,
yeah,
the main changes are pretty much in this category.
yeah, and that's just because we still need like it's really important that we have cards for the vials and stuff like that. So Jitte is really important now that we don't have Plague Engineer.
Yep.
And since we're running equipment, Mother of Runes is better because we want to be able to connect with Jit and stuff
Yeah.
like that. But a theme, if you look at the decks that I make, is I prefer like if I like cards and I think they're good, I'm just gonna play them.
Yeah.
um, like I don't feel like I'm not one to just like test a bunch of stuff and be like, oh, this like really crazy other card is like gonna be a little bit better than these other cards. Like I'm very much this works and it's just like I don't feel I'll trim like and change different numbers of things, and if there's a card that I like see that's really good, I'll try it out. But for the most part, if I it's kind of the same thought process that I have when people ask me if I'm talking about my deck and they're like, all right, why'd you pick this card? And it's like, well, I picked this card because I think it's the best card for this like a job. And
Yeah.
people are like, why didn't you pick this other card or like any of these other cards? And every time like my response in my head is just like, I think my 75 cards are the best 75 cards for the like online meta. And I think every other card is not as good. Like just as an idea. Um, obviously that's not like the 100% like thought process, but I play the cards that I think are good, and then for the switching from green white to green white black it's very much like, all right, well, the black cards fill in these roles, so what can I use in white that does the same thing, because I need to have those tools still even though it's in white.
Yeah. I like the sideboard a lot because when you're playing a deck, you really want to have consistency to see how good some cards are. And here we have, 3 path, we have 3 choke, we have 4 leyline, we pretty much have, 4 turn 1 effects against combo, and then Gaddock Teeg with Green Suns is a 4 of in the main deck. So you're going to see a lot of these cards as well, so you're going to know how good they are in the matches where you want them.
Yeah, and there's a quick note on like the 4 turn 1 things. I think that's the number, and I think a lot of people who there's still a lot of people who either don't play Maverick and think Maverick's not good against combo, or who play Maverick and like lose to combo and think that Maverick's not good against combo. And if you look at their sideboard, it's like, okay, just run. Just you need to run some deafening silences. You need to run some chalices, and combo just is so much easier. Like I feel favored against almost every combo deck I play against. The again, big ones that aren't favored are Doomsday and blue green show and tell. I
Yeah.
think red blue is actually pretty close, like sneak and show,
Okay.
because um, Knight of Autumn's really good, and they're a lot more likely to just go for like show and tell in a creature and you can bounce it, or show and tell in sneak attack, put in something, and you can still bounce it like that turn, but you still have to deal with it, and then you can green sun for Knight of Autumn and stuff like that. Like I feel like we have the tools to beat them even then. So I think I don't know where the idea that Maverick is bad against combo comes from, but I just I just don't get it. And I think the people who are playing Maverick who think it's bad aren't like respecting it enough. And I think that maybe one of the reasons for me is that like in Modern, I played Burn and I played Humans for a bit, but my first deck that I played in Modern was Blue-Red Gift Storm. So every deck I play, I'm just like, all right, how do I beat Storm also? Like, but yeah, I definitely like turn 1 effects are just the most important. So with the 4, you can run if you wanted to run like 4 Deafening Silence. That's acceptable, but I like Chalices a lot for other matchups. And then 4 Leyline of the Void is also really good.
Yeah.
So that's why like those 8 cards have been in every one of my sideboards for the past like 6 months. Like either 2 Deafening Silence, 2 Chalice, and then 4 Leylines. Like everything else is question, that's fine. But those 8 are just awesome.
Yeah.
It just means you just beat combo almost across the board. Obviously, the other thing I think that makes people think Maverick loses the combo is that we lose to their best draws. But again, that's very similar to the other situations where it's like you're gonna lose to the best draws, and you have to accept that and just move on to how can I punish them when they don't have their best draws and stuff like that. So I think Maverick is one of the best decks for punishing them when they don't have like turn 1 win and stuff like that. Like Thalia is awesome, Chalice is great, Deafening Silence, and Leyline of Void even gives you a very real turn 0 like impact on the board.
Yeah, it's kind of like how Forcer will against some decks.
Yeah, exactly. Like having it for Tez and stuff like that. Like the odds that they're gonna have a turn 1 win against you through a Leyline of the Void, like they can, but it's not likely. And I think people focus a lot where it's like, oh, they beat me on turn 1. It's like, yeah, that sucks, but don't like play with that in mind. Like don't be like, all right, how can I beat them on if they beat me on turn 1? It's like, well, you can't, but that's gonna happen like 5% of the time. So focus on the other 95%. Especially Tez. Like Tez used to be like always turn 1, and lately they've been slowing it down a lot more with like defense grids and things like that. So yeah, I find Tez used to be a lot sketchier, but now I'm feeling like it's probably favored for me. Although it's less favored than Ant, obviously, because Ant is too slow.
Yeah. One nice thing about defense grid is that although, say if players are playing against a lot of Mindbreak Traps or Veil of Summers and they want to have something for that, defense grid is great. But if we're bringing in things like Deafening Silence and Chalice that just don't care about defense grid, then that's pretty awesome, because they're obviously spending a turn to play a card that we don't care about, and it's also an extra turn that we get to hopefully maybe drop a Thalia after a turn 1 play, or get a Gaddock Teeg or a Green Suns for like a Collector Ouphe.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like they have to board that out against us, I feel. But even just game 1, like, because a lot of the times they will play at game 1, they'll turn 1 land Chrome Mox defense grid, and it's like, all right, I'm feeling good with this matchup.
Yeah.
So yeah, defense grid is them switching to that instead of Thoughtseize is a really big boost, because I think they're still running Thoughtseize now, but there was a period of time I think where Tez was like 4 Veil of Summers and the 4 defense grids, stuff like that. Obviously, I don't remember the actual numbers because I don't play Tez, but I do pay attention to it. So I think during that time, I feel like the matchup was just actively good for us.
Yeah, okay. Especially with Deafening Silence, just a huge printing for a lot of fair decks like Maverick, where it is just a great turn 1 play. We've always had really good turn 2s in like Thalia, Gaddock Teeg, Aethersworn Canonist.
Yeah, Canonist.
But we've never really had a great turn 1 other than Chalice on 0. So Deafening Silence is really nice.
Yeah, it helps a lot. I definitely was not as excited about Deafening Silence when it came out. Like I definitely underrated it, but yeah, like being able to play it on turn 1 is just nuts. And that's when it got printed. Like that's when I had these are my 4 turn 1 interaction cards, and here we are.
Yeah, it's a good mix as well because it breaks up things like Echoing Truth and just little
Yeah, and
things like that.
like pulverize. I think is that the six mana red spell
Yeah, you
can
can
like sack. Yeah,
a mountain or two mountains.
I think it's got to be two mountains. Yeah,
Yeah,
because I think that would be crazy.
yeah.
I'm gonna check.
But then also
But yeah, that card.
to have Chalice against something like Elves, where Deafening Silence isn't worth bringing in, is also nice. So you
Yeah,
do get some
yeah, exactly.
flexibility instead of just having four of one of these, which is great as well.
And it being Chalice being a card that beats combo and a lot of fair decks is really good.
Yeah,
And that's what I like whenever people ask me about like, oh, can I play like this instead of Chalice? It's like you can, um, but you're gonna lose percentage points in like the Snowco matchups and stuff like that because Chalice is really good. And like Chalice is really good against Doomsday also. Like that's one of the cards that's really good because they're almost always gonna win by Dark Ritual Doomsday. So Chalice in one is very very good.
yeah,
Like it's almost the same as a Chalice on three.
yeah, definitely, yeah, I like that. Uh, I got kind of memed by a Doomsday player who just went. They knew I was on Maverick. I lost game one and game two. They just went Dark Ritual into Doomsday, and they just got two fetches, two duels, and Thassa's Oracle because they knew
Nice.
they could win by the time I had any sort of clock online.
Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
but yeah, Doomsday is a pretty tough one. I know Mark's been having some success with Meddling Mage out of the board in blue decks, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's always interesting to know what their pile is because if they have removal, then it's obviously pretty good for dealing with the Meddling Mage. But if not, then maybe I think Mark had the play of just playing Meddling Mage after they Doomsday.
Yeah, that seems reasonable.
But I find it
Um,
really hard
Card-
for non Meddling Mage or any sort of non blue deck.
yeah, and I think the main ways we can fight it if like it becomes more popular, which I think it is picking up because it's really good. It's just a good deck.
Hmm.
Is if we were in black, running Thoughtseize would be good. And a card that was really good for me before I took the break was Sanctum Prelate in the matchup.
Okay.
Sanctum Prelate's nuts in that matchup. You still name one, but being able to play it main deck and just name one, it just shuts off like everything. Uh,
Yeah, because they do
but
play
again,
for Brainstorm Ponder Preordain,
yeah, exactly.
and then
And
Ritual, of
like Dark
course.
Ritual, and then if they're running like any removal on the board, it's often one drops.
Yep. Yeah, like Fatal
Um,
Push.
yeah, so that would be considerations if Doomsday becomes a bigger problem. I really like Sanctum Prelate, and I wish it was better in other matchups. But it's a card that when I was playing green white made me feel even better about um, specifically the blue green show and tell deck because they don't even have an answer to it. Like they actually don't have anything for Sanctum Prelate on three. Um,
Yeah, because they
because
can't Cunning Wish, they can't Intuition, they
yeah,
can't Show and
they
Tell.
can't cutting wish. So yeah, it's nuts. And that's when blue green show and tell started being like the deck, right? The show and tell deck, because people started switching to it for veils and stuff. That I was always like, man, this deck seems so much worse than red blue. Like I just play Sanctum Prelate and I win. Like
Yeah,
this is crazy.
because at
Um,
least like Sneak and Show has the out of just hardcast sneak attack, or if you name four,
yeah,
then you still have Show and Tell.
yeah, exactly. It's a lot harder to lock them out. Whereas Omnitel is just very it's very like this is my plan, uh, and that's all I got. And I think having Sanctum Prelate was really helpful against a lot of decks like that. It's the same for Doomsday. Doomsday is like this is what I'm gonna do, and I think unfortunately without Sanctum Prelate, Maverick has a hard time interacting with decks that are doing that, where it's like I'm casting this card and it's gonna win me the game. Um,
Yeah,
but
that's
I
very
don't
true.
yeah I don't think Sanctum Prelate's worth it though unless those decks become more popular because yeah the biggest draw to Sanctum Prelate was the same as Chalice, where it's like it's great in the combo matchups like that, but it's also good in just like against miracles, where it's like you name Swords to Plowshares and now you can stick a Teeg and then you just win.
Yeah,
But I think now you can't rely on it in the fair matchups anymore.
yeah,
Oh man, it used to be so good in the Delver matchup too. I'm just like remembering this. It was so good. So many good so many good wins.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's too bad.
What are your thoughts on this deck and losing the black? What are you kind of losing out on?
I think you're losing a fair amount from like a lot of your good matchups are still good, but they're not as good. Like I found with the black splash, like again, matchups like lands and depths, which are probably like we're favored at least. But with Kaya and Decay, the matchup just goes from like favored to just like almost unlosable. Like it's crazy, the amount of like impact you get. Like you, it's a lot more of like you have your basic plan of just being Maverick, right? Just getting Knight of the Reliquary out and Swords to Plowshares and things like that. But you can just like you can still lose if they have an answer to that. But with black, it feels like you just they have to answer so many different types of things, like having to answer Kaya's and stuff like that. Um, and obviously, like in terms of just specific cards, like Abrupt Decay is a really good catch-all answer that you don't have. So you're gonna be in games where you don't have like a good answer to Oko is a big one.
Yeah.
Um, things like that, and not having Plague Engineer is obviously a hit to your Elves matchup more than anything. I think I haven't played against Goblins with green white, but I I think losing Plague Engineer is also really big there.
Yeah.
Um,
You don't have a way
I think
to really restrict those decks to go wide.
yeah, I think we definitely like as much as we do lose those points, and this is that's why I would be playing black right now is because I think Kaya is just it just makes all your good matchups very very good, and it helps a lot in the other matchups. But in specifically like the mirror, I think Mother of Rooms is really really good, and having Jitte, like having the Stoneforge package is obviously really good for those types of matchups that we lose Plague Engineer. Um, One thing that I consciously did when I was building this deck was since we're losing out on all the awesome black cards to deal with the graveyard like Kaya, I have the second Scavenging Ooze
Yeah. I
uh,
like that a lot.
because like the graveyard's being used by almost every deck right now, so we want more answers to it. Um, yeah, other than that, like it's very much like we're like, all right, we're playing green white now, so we can't play the black cards, so we just cut those. And then it's like, all right, now what did those cards do? It's like, okay, Plague Engineer, we'll bring in the Stoneforge package, and then like Kaya, all right, we'll play a second Scooz, and then Mother of Runes is just helpful. Like Mother of Runes goes well with the Stoneforge.
Yeah, definitely. I think.
And I have a fifth mana dork just because I I just I like having the extra mana dork when you can. I
Yeah.
think there's just one of the other reasons is in when I play green white as we have here, I cut a land as opposed to playing green white black because I
Oh
feel
yeah, we're
like
on 22.
it's just you can play a leaner deck. I think with green white because your mana is a lot stabler, so you don't need to draw the extra mana because you're not going to get wastelanded because you can just get forest plains and you're good. Um, what, a lot of the times when people were telling me to splash back in the day, they would say that it's like basically free, and it just isn't, right? Like the difference between a regular draw green white where you go basic forest fetch, noble, then fetch for a basic plains, versus a regular game of playing Abzan, you pretty much have to fetch value, and then you have it on basic now, so you might as well put the savannah, and then just like well, scroll into round it out. It's just the average draws in terms of the land base are so much scarier with the if you want access to your cards, and if you don't, if you do get your basics, then it hurts. Like it's having basic form when you're playing back is like really crappy a lot of the times because it doesn't help you cast Kaya and stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly.
So
I'm just having some
I
connection issues with you. Can I just quickly close the
oh
call and restart it?
yeah sure.
1 second. Hey, you were just cutting out a little bit.
How about now?
There we go. That's really good. Let me quickly
Nice.
share my screen again. You can see my screen?
Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. I think it was just because the call was going long on Discord.
Yeah, that could be it. I feel like sometimes Discord just doesn't work for a bit. I don't know.
Which is still pretty good for a free resource.
Oh yeah, Discord's awesome. I remember when it came out, I was like, man, this is just so awesome. Like, Skype, no thanks.
Yeah, I like what it's done for Magic as well, having all these different subs for different archetypes.
Yeah, and also just having like Discord tournaments and stuff like that. It's really cool.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, so this deck I find with green white whenever I play it, it's really consistent, and that's one of the big reasons why I love playing it.
That's a big thing. Is like you're gonna get to cast your spells. It's more of a matter of, are these spells good enough to win the game?
Yeah. I guess right now the one reason why I wouldn't play it is that you do only have the 4 swords in the main deck, and if you're playing against a lot of rug, you really have to put them in a position to be trading some of their creatures for yours. Because if you don't, if you use the swords on the first Delver and then they land an Arcanist, you really need to find that second swords ASAP. Unless you have something like a Scooz or some other way to interact with it. But with Rug right now having the 4 Delvers, the 4 Dreadhordes, Tarmogoyf, Hooting Mandrills, the Black Splash is just so nice, and having those Abrupt Decays and Kayas where relevant.
Yeah, I think that's a big part. I think in general against Delver, you pretty much just can't swords like the turn 1 Delver unless you have extra removal. Because Arcanist is obviously just crazy. So I think a lot of the times with this deck, you'd probably want to get a Mom online and then fetch a Scrib Ranger, which is obviously really awkward. But you're going to be fetching Scrib Ranger a lot in the Delver matchup with this deck.
Yeah.
Because Scrib Ranger is the answer that you can have to Delver.
Why couldn't it be a 2/2? Let's be honest here.
Yeah, I agree. That would be sweet.
Yep.
But yeah, so I think the combination of Mom and Scrib Ranger is what you'd end up leaning on heavily, and then Stoneforge Mystic fetching Batterskull is really good in any Delver match also. So you gain some extra things with, like, Stoneforge is a card that they have a lot of trouble with, but you lose a lot of the efficient and like just reliable answers that you get with Black. So
yeah,
I think the Delver matchup is I definitely prefer Black right now, but there's definitely times where it's like, oh man, it would be nice if I had Stoneforge, or if I was just able to fetch basics, right? Like, fetching basics is so good.
Yeah, it is. Especially when sometimes I do it with green, white, black, but it can really hurt you if you start drawing your black cards but don't have like a fetch land.
Yeah.
So you do have to be a little bit cautious there. But of course, in this deck where you're just running the green and black, it's really nice.
Yeah.
The Batterskull is interesting as well because some people would say that Stoneforge has a lot of targets on its head right now, so there's just so much removal that can get rid of it on turn 2 or turn 3. But at least in this deck with the 5 mana dorks and the Cradle, Batterskull isn't going to be dead in your hand like it might be in, say, like a Death and Taxes shell, because you do have ways to accelerate your mana out, and even if Stoneforge dies, you could have Batterskull in play as early as turn 4.
Yeah, I agree. That's my philosophy on Stoneforge getting Batterskull. Is a lot of people, and they're not like super wrong in that. Yes, if you get Batterskull with Stoneforge and they bolt it, it's not awesome because you won't be able to put the Batterskull out, but it does mean that, like, they're down on cards in this trade, and as long as you're not getting pressured on mana, like, Maverick is one of the decks that can just cast Batterskull and bounce it and cast it.
Yeah.
Do lots of crazy things with that.
Exactly. So it's always a nice win when you get like your Germ Abrupt Decayed or Swords. You're like, that's fine. I'm cool with that.
Yeah, and so that's my philosophy on that. Whenever people bring up that, oh, I fetch Batterskull and my Stoneforge dies, it's like, that's something you should expect, and you should be relatively happy when that happens, I think.
Yep, especially for removal spells going on the Stoneforge Mystic, it's one less that's going to go on a Knight or a Mum, or the creature that's actually attacking with a piece of equipment, which is nice.
Yeah,
I know
and obviously,
Sorry.
If you expect that it'll die, you can still just fetch Jitte.
Yeah.
Even when I think it's gonna die, I still almost always get it against Delver. I like Skull. I think it's just a really good card. I think it's against Rug probably it's worse just because Oko is still there,
Hmm.
which is unfortunate. But so against Rug Delver, it's a little bit more of a toss-up. But I still think Batterskull is just it asks a very difficult to answer question, which is what we want in our cards, I think. And if they have to bolt the Stoneforge, everyone should be happy if their Stoneforge gets bolted. That should
Yeah.
everyone should be like perfect, because like yeah, it takes the removal spell, and you still have a card that they do have to answer later.
Yeah, exactly. There's always a little bit of mind game as well when they go like turn 2 Stoneforge, get Jide, and you're like, do I swords it now? Do I keep the swords for when they actually want to attack with like a Jide creature? Do they have the Batterskull in hand? Like, there's always a few things you have to think through. But yeah, Stoneforge is usually pretty nice, and it's kind of nice to see it back in a deck because it's obviously a card like Mother of Runes that's kind of fallen out of favor.
Yeah, yeah. I definitely I like Stoneforge a lot. Uh, but yeah, I think overall, in terms of cards that you would cut for the Black Splash, I think it and Mom are just not as good as the rest of the cards. Like it's basically like we look at Maverick, it's like we need all of these other cards. Like we need Knights. I want Once Upon a Time.
Yep.
I as long as I play Maverick, I will never go below 3 Thalia, and I never ever want to go like I like playing 4 Thalia. I think you should play 4 Thalia unless your meta is really weird, because even when people are like, that's another thing where people think Maverick is worse against combo, right? It's like, are you running 4 Thalia? That's a good question to ask, because
Yeah.
like that's a very Thalia is just such a versatile, good card.
Yeah.
But so when you go down the list of like, well, I need 4 to 5 dorks, I need Thalia, I need swords. Like, Stoneforge is one of the cards where it's like, oh, I mean, it's nice, but I have Plague Engineer, so I don't need it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a nice like package that once you take the package out, there's 4 or 5 slots you can play around with.
Yeah.
I know you're a fan of sort of Light and Shadow in the past.
Yeah, I played it a lot, and like if I was gonna add a third equipment, I would probably play that, or sort of Feast and Famine. But I'm not the biggest fan of sort of Feast and Famine, just because I don't like the idea of having not protection from white.
Yeah.
Like protection from white is just really important. And I think in almost all of the matchups where you want Stoneforge and you want to get a sword, you're gonna want protection from white. The only time otherwise, like one of the big arguments people use is like, it gives you protection from Oko and stuff like that. And it's like, well, the equipment's probably a 3/3 at that point then, so it's
Yeah.
just not as good.
Yeah, exactly.
Like it's fine, right? Like you're paying the 2 mana and the Stoneforge activation to put the equipment in, but at that point, all equipment's going to be the same, so it's not a good argument, I think, for sort of Feast and Famine.
Yeah. Okay. I like that.
But yeah, I like sort of Light and Shadow, especially if like Death and Taxes is popular, or like Miracles and stuff like that.
Yeah. Having the non-swordsable creature is pretty huge.
Yeah.
Mark was asking from the Discord, your sideboard looks pretty non-creature heavy. How often do you side out Once Upon a Time if you are bringing in a huge amount of non-creature spells?
Yeah. So, I mean, as we went through like some of the sideboarding, and I guess if we want to look at the blacklist again.
Yeah.
But for the most part, we trim 1 in a lot of matchups, and
Yep.
in matchups like Miracles and stuff like that, I would trim 2 to 3. Because the other thing is, it's not Once Upon a Time. Yes, we want it to be able to hit creatures, but a lot of the time also we're gonna want it to hit a land in like the early game.
Yeah.
So even when we cut some number of like creatures, we still want it to like smooth out our draws. Like specifically for the Delver matchup, right? The Delver matchup, we're cutting like 3 creatures and we're bringing in 3 paths and a planeswalker. but we want to hit those land drops. We need like we really want that extra consistency. So I don't like cutting too many onces there, because of that.
Yeah.
So I think it's a lot of, yes, you're losing some level of the consistency of once upon a time being able to hit a creature when you want a threat, but it's also fixing your mana and giving you that extra bit of consistency. So I do trim some. The other reason is like it's similar to I know in lands back when they were running I don't remember what the card that like when it's in the graveyard your land's all tapped for mana.
Oh, Riftstone Portal.
Riftstone Portal, yeah. Stuff like that, like a card like Riftstone Portal is like the first cut in every lands deck when they were running it, because it's like, well, it's really good, but like, it's not necessary for the deck to function. So I think having onces makes it easy to like sideboard, because it's like, okay, onces are really good, but if I need extra paths and stuff, I can trim a once upon a time, and it gives me the room. But yeah, so overall, when I don't think too much about the non-creature count and the creature count when I'm sideboarding, because it's very rare that it gets really bad. Like even when I'm bringing in, like in the Delver matchup, the 4 non-creatures for the 4 creatures, like I think that's about as bad as it gets.
Yeah.
Like in most matchups, that's about as bad as it gets, and you're still able to hit creatures pretty often. And again, you're gonna want to hit lands a fair amount of the time too. So
yeah, I reckon in my time that I've played it, I reckon it's nearly 50-50 that I've wanted creatures and I've wanted lands.
yeah, so I don't like consciously think about like, oh man, I have too many. It's more of like whenever I do cut once, it's more of I need all these other cards, so I'll just take the hit inconsistency and cut a couple once upon a times.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense.
That's more of what I'm thinking about when I do cut once upon a time. I'm not super like, oh man, I have 20 creatures, like I gotta cut once upon a times.
With
Yeah.
with the lack in, I guess Back to Basics is the one card that can punish you for going for jewels early on, but in general, have you ever thought about adding an extra color, so like a blue or red splash?
I like a few months ago I did, and I made a list with like Leovold and Okos and stuff. But overall, like you can't. It's probably good, and I've played against a lot of like the Bant Mavericks and the 4 colors before, but I don't feel like I really need it. I think the black cards are really good. I don't feel like right now, if I'm looking at this list, like I don't see anything that's like that needs to be upgraded into like Oko or something. Like I want Kaya's. Like yeah, Kaya's could be Okos, and that might be better in a lot of the matchups, but I think for the roles that these cards serve, there's not many things that we gain from splashing like blue. Things like I know that you were playing with Brainstorm, and Brainstorm's really good. Like it would be cool, but I don't want to splash for Brainstorm.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
And that's similar to a lot of other things. Like having 4 colors, as much as having 3 is very close to free with the meta that we're in right now, I think 4 is, without like a lot of really good fixing, is similar to how 3 colors feels back when like Blood Moon was popular. It's like 4 colors is annoying. Like you can't, if you let's say you don't have a mana dork, right? Like then you have to fetch Bayu and then like a Tundra or something. Like it gets really hard to make that work, and you're a lot more easily, like it's easier for your colors to get cut off. So if I was gonna splash 4 colors, they would have to be really good cards.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Especially because it would jeopardize your ability to play these cards when you want to play them, most likely.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And I don't think that's probably worth the risk. But I assume if you did play 4 colors, or if someone wanted to play 4 colors, you would probably up your mana dork count to make sure that you have a mana dork on most of your starting turns.
Yeah, I'd probably go up to 5. But the other thing is I don't like going too heavy on the mana dorks, because we want to draw cards that do things in the late game. So
Nobles on turn 12 aren't great.
Yeah. So with the once upon a times, I generally rely on that to consistently hit my curves.
Yeah.
But Yeah, obviously, yeah. If you're splashing 4 colors, you need the fixing. Like that's more what you care about.
Yeah. Um,
Uh,
if you could create a Green Sun Zenith target, do you have anything in mind?
I saw that question and I was like, hmm. The thing is, I remember thinking, before Collector Ouphe was printed, I'm like, man, they should print Stony Silence on on a
Yeah.
creature because
Yep.
like that's something that's just so good. And now that they did print it, it's like this card is awesome. As soon as it was printed, I I was just like, all right, this should be in every Maverick 75. I
Yep.
think I said it in one of your articles.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, that was the one card in that set that I was like, this card is gonna be played 100%. Um, to be fair, in the same thing, I think I missed like Renin 6. I was like, yeah, Renin 6 is good, but you know whatever. Collector, now that's where the real money is. Um,
Can't even be
but
killed by Renin 6.
yeah, exactly. But,
Nice.
um,
Yeah, Ufu is a good
yeah,
printing.
yeah, I really like the card. Um,
Especially
but
against
other than that,
a few
I
of
guess
those. Sorry, I was gonna say against like those mono blue prison kind of echo decks, it's just phenomenal because a lot of their lands
yeah,
are also artifacts.
yeah, being able to get it and just shut off like any type of artifact deck is crazy.
Yeah,
Um,
especially any running a Khan package as well because you're also hitting that.
yeah, yeah, no, I that's probably like that would have been what I would said. Other than that, like I would love to be able to green sun for a Sanctum Prelate. Uh, that
Yeah.
would be really nice.
Yep.
Or Lavinia. Lavinia is a really cool card that I wish was green.
Keeper of
'Cause
Silence.
the the 2-drop one.
Ah, that one. Yeah. Okay.
The one that stops Moxen and stuff.
I
Yeah.
believe it's a Renegade. It's Lavinia
Yeah.
Renegade
Artorias
something.
Renegade. Yeah.
There we
Yeah.
go. Yeah. Very cool card.
Yeah. That card is so close to play. If it was green, it's probably playable in Maverick. But
Hmm.
I think the fact that it's not green makes it not super good.
Yeah. I think probably the one thing that I've wanted from a good green target. I know there was like a wolf from a recent standard set, but a creature that can fight that comes in and trades. So like a removal
Yeah.
spell off Green Suns would be really nice.
Yeah, that would give us a lot of flexibility.
Yeah, I'm not in a position to play like Ulvenwald Tracker or the something wolf. Like I think it's when it comes into play, it fights a creature, but it's only like a 3/3. And if you have like a food, it gets like +1/+1 or something.
Yeah, I know the one you're talking about. I don't remember what it's called.
Yeah.
I know it was played in like standard.
Yes.
I think it was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. But yeah, something that can come down and either destroy a creature or like an abrupt decay kind of effect off a creature might be too powerful, but you know, even as a 4-drop, I wouldn't mind it if it's got a good body behind it.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, so I think I'm not a super creative person. So if I was gonna pick one card to make green, I would pick Lavinia because that card is like it just lights out to combo. Like almost any combo. It's just
Yeah.
like rituals are just bad now because like you can't cast ad nauseum without 5 lands in play, and it turns off any like petals or LEDs or anything like that.
Yeah, exactly.
It even makes soul lands worse because you can't go Ancient Tomb like Island Show and Tell anymore. You have to have 3 lands to cast Show and Tell. Like,
yeah, that's very true. And they can't force in the early turns either.
Yeah, like I play fair. Like I used to play a bit more Vintage online, and I would play Dark Petition Storm, which is a very fun deck. It's as vintage as it gets, which is why I play it. On top of the fact that it's like the only blue vintage deck that doesn't run like 7 forces.
Okay. Yeah.
And Force of Wills are $1 billion, so I'm not gonna buy that.
Does it play Defense Grid?
It plays like 3, I think.
Okay.
Or at least I was playing 3.
Cool.
Yeah. So whenever they cast like Lavinia against you, it's just you just can't do anything. So a lot of the decks are actually running Caracas specifically like for that. I think DPS it's gone down in popularity though now that Paradoxical Outcome is just clearly the best combo deck in Vintage.
Yeah.
And they get to play Lavinia.
Yeah. Yeah, it's absurd because it's only one-sided. It's just one of those newly printed cards.
I just hate that. I don't know why Wizards decided that one side 8 pairs are good.
Yeah.
It's just the lamest design ever. Because
Definitely.
it just feels bad, right? Like, at least if I play Collector Ouphe, like, I'm not gonna be able to use my Jitte or something, right? At least there's something.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
like, when the deck that abuses like Petals and everything and Moxen and all that stuff gets to play 2 Lavinias, it's just like, come on. So
um,
yeah,
One other question was, I guess in this list, there's no Qasali Pridemage, and you have a Knight of Autumn in the main deck.
I think Knight of Autumn is hands down better than Pridemage, like 99% of the time.
Yeah, okay.
Ever since Knight of Autumn was printed, I instantly switched over to Knight of Autumn, and I have not wanted Pridemage like at all. The only time that Pridemage is like better is if you're looking for a threat-ish creature that has Exalted, like, and this happened sometimes where like they have a Jace. This is more common when it was just blue-white miracles, and you have you can fetch like a Dryad Arbor, and then you can Green Sun for an Exalted thing to get it down to like 0.
Yep.
If they had to bounce something or stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then it would be nice to be able to get Pridemage instead of Noble Hierarch. So that's a reason. Exalted is a real reason to have Pridemage.
Yeah.
And the other reason is to hold up the like seal effect of it, like the instant speed, be able to destroy something.
Yeah.
But I feel like Collector Ouphe does that pretty much as well. So
Yeah.
if I need that, like if I'm against Death and Taxes, I'm just gonna Green Sun Zenith for Collector Ouphe. I'm not gonna get Pridemage and hold it up to blow up the Jitte or something. Like, I'm just gonna get Collector Ouphe. So I think the biggest thing, as much as obviously people look at, oh, you're playing Knight of Autumn instead of Pridemage, I think it's more that I'm playing Collector Ouphe. So Pridemage is just like the reason why you would play Pridemage is just filled in by Collector Ouphe already. So Knight of Autumn cleans up the rest, and then you also just gain percentage points in other matchups where like you gain life with Knight of Autumn often, like against Burn, for example.
Yeah.
Knight of Autumn is pretty much always what you're gonna Green Sun Zenith for, and it's always great. So I think the flexibility of it, and then just the fact that it is you go up on cards with Knight of Autumn. Like, you can fetch a Knight of Autumn and blow up their Astrolab, and you have a threat still. Like, I think that just makes it so that even though situationally Pridemage might be better, Knight of Autumn is just hands down like better in so many other situations, and just from like a value of the card standpoint, like the fact that when you want Pridemage, you're gonna go 1 for 1, whereas when you want Knight of Autumn, you're gonna go 2 for 1, or like 1 for 0, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
Is just that's why I just will always play Knight of Autumn. And so the only time I would play Pridemage is if Death and Taxes is like every other deck. And
yeah, I think
then
the
I would still probably play both.
the lower amount of Stoneforge Mystic decks is a big reason why you don't really have to worry about what your opponent does in their turn, because obviously Knight can't kill a Jitter that comes down in your end step and then attacks in their turn. You can deal it with the following turn, but
yes, exactly. Yeah, so that is the biggest reason. I think I remember. I think someone mentioned that Pridemage costing 2 is helpful, and I think that's fair. That's true. It helps you curve out, but you're gonna need the 3rd mana anyways. So if you have 2 mana, if you have not enough mana to get Knight of Autumn, but enough mana to get Pridemage, you can't activate it that turn anyways. So, like,
yeah, and I think
it's gonna be a turn late, regardless.
Yeah, and I think for a lot of the matchups, a little bit like Ooze, I'm probably not going to play it where I don't also have a mana open.
Yeah. So it's essentially the same mana cost, and if you're using it in the matchup that you want Pridemage, it's gonna die. Like, that's the biggest thing, where it's like, I'm boarding in Pridemage, but like the way that the card is designed is it's naturally like a hedge of like it's supposed to be better on its own, but you're just gonna side it out in those matchups. So yeah. I think Knight of Autumn is just way better, and that's been my opinion on that card ever since it's printed. And I know there's a lot of people who think otherwise, but yeah, that's my thought process for it.
Yeah, even little things like I guess one thing that I do like Pridemage against is back to basics. Sometimes we are usually locked out a bit of mana. You might be able to squeeze a Pridemage in there, but against like Show and Tell, if they put in Omniscience, then they can't put in a creature before you destroy the
Yeah.
Omniscience, but with Pridemage, they obviously have priority to cast a creature before you can activate it.
Yeah, that's another big difference, and that's another reason. I think that's one of the other reasons why I always felt like Show and Tell was a better matchup than a lot of other people. Like I remember hearing people say that it was like, like it was like 40% Maverick or 30%, like, and it's just like I have not had that experience at all. Like Knight of Autumn is it's really good in that matchup.
Yeah, especially if
Yeah.
you have like Thalia out and you know they can't Cunning Wish in response, then Knight's just
Yeah.
so good because if they put in a creature, they put in a creature. But if they don't, then Knight's awesome. And if they do
Yeah,
put
and
in a creature, you can still, gain 4 life or put 2 counters on it, which
yeah.
might not have an impact on the game, but at least you have the choice.
And they're very rarely gonna put in a creature unless that's like all they got, because you just most of the time we're gonna have a Knight of the Reliquary, right? So we can just get Caracas.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the combination of having Knight of Autumn and Knight of the Reliquary make the Show and Tell matchup a lot more doable. But again, that's also why the Omnitel, the blue-green one right now, when I'm not running Saint Prelate, I feel like that one's harder because they always go for Omniscience, and they can often have, even if I have a Thalia, right, if they have the 1 extra mana, they're probably fine. Right? Like, so. And obviously, Knight of Autumn being a 1-of makes it hard to just have every time. Although I do a pretty good job.
Last question, I guess, is Collector Ouphe in the main against Gaddock Teeg. I think right now people are just finding that Collector Ouphe has a wider spread of matchups where it actually has an effect against, and Teeg is still good out of the board against, against Elves. You're going to want Teeg over Collector Ouphe.
Yeah.
But
and the more I think about it, that's like about it. Like,
yeah,
I feel like, because now that they don't play Terminus in the control decks, right? Like, I think if there was a card, I think there was something like if we were gonna look at any flex spots in the list, I think the 2 cards that are closest to being cut are Gaddock, Teeg, and the Vraska. I think my 60 main deck is awesome, and that's always been my thought. Is that's why they're there.
yeah, yeah, that's fair enough.
So for the most part, whenever I am like messing around with different numbers of cards, it's always in the board. Obviously, this is after playing a bit and like figuring out what the list is. I don't just pick 60 and be like, that's it, never changing this. But yeah, I think Gaddock Teeg, like as I was like thinking about matchups before this, I was like, yeah, it's just not very good. So I think if I'm gonna cut something, that would be the next one. So I think that answers why I like Collector Ouphe main deck.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like right now as well, if you do it like, turn 1 mana accelerant and your opponent plays a card that Collector Ouphe is going to be good against that matchup, then Green Suns for Ouphe is just so much of the time lights out.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? Like if you're against, I guess you could compare it kind of similarly to how Gaddock Teeg is against Ant, where it's like you see that they duress you, and it's like, okay, Teeg just wins me the game. It's similar to that, but like for the Echo of Eon's deck, the Urza one,
Yeah.
not Tez, but it's similar for Tez too. Like that's the thing is, Gaddock Teeg, I loved it because you would Green Sun for it, and the Ant player would concede. Like that would be it.
Yeah.
And that was the best. That was the best feeling. But now it's like even in Ant, you can just Green Sun for Collector Ouphe, and they like that's pretty difficult for them to storm through. Like no petals and LEDs is a big thing for them to deal with.
Yeah.
Having played Ant, like LED is really really important for that deck. So I find even the matchups where Teeg is better, like the literal only one where Teeg is better is Elves. And I don't think Teeg is good enough against Elves that I'm going to want it in my main deck where I draw it in all the other matchups. And like again, Ouphe being main deck is not even a choice in my opinion. I think the free wins that you get with it are nuts, and then just being able to get it against the Vial decks and stuff like that is also really good.
Yeah, it's huge. I do find that Tess does now have a bit more of a consideration for creatures like Ouphe and Teeg, and they will do something like Burning Wish for Grape Shot, which is usually pretty tough. But
and the other for that specifically, like Teeg would be worse than Ouphe in that case, because Teeg doesn't even like Ouphe can make it more difficult for them to have all the mana for that, right?
Yeah, that's very
Like,
true.
whereas Teeg is sort of like a you can't win the game, but you can still operate your deck. Whereas Ouphe has like an immediate impact on their ability to just cast spells with like Chrome Hawks and stuff.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, these two lists look sweet. I'm a huge fan of Abzan or Green White Black, so I have been running this and it has been really fun. And I do like that just the double up of these is really nice for consistency because they're not cards we can tutor for. They're cards we can try to find with Library and with Plague we can find through once, but it's nice to just know that you have double ups in the deck because even against the deck where, say, Kaya or Plague gets countered, you kind of know there's a second one in the deck, which is always a nice feeling.
Yeah, and it's like it's a good number of like I want to see one of these often, right? Like you don't want to see multiple Kayas, especially if the one doesn't get countered. So I think 2 is a good number for stuff like that.
Yeah.
Where like if you drew multiples, you would be unhappy.
Yeah.
Same with like that's like there's 2 chokes in my board because drawing multiple chokes is not the best. Yeah.
Lastly, what are your thoughts on Questing Beast? I think some people think it's a meme, but it's
amazing.
Yeah.
That Questing Beast was like the biggest reason why in like January and February I was just playing green white. It's because people would be like, "Oh, well, Plague Engineer's in black," and it's like, "Well, Questing Beast is in green," so like I could just stay in green, and Plague Engineer it was used at that point like just to break through Mom Mirrors, right? And Questing Beast does that, and it also just it's a clock. It's a really fast clock. And it beats True Nemesis. Like everything that Plague Engineer does, Questing Beast also does in a way.
Yep.
Obviously, in this deck, it's sweet because we get to have both. But that was like Questing Beast being printed was what I was just like, all right, green white is the best variant at that point because I felt like my mana was getting attacked a lot more. Whereas right now, I feel like it's pretty easy. So.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing how many creatures can't block it in the format as well. Especially creatures that are kind of in a deck to slow down opposing creatures like Ice Fangs and Baleful Strixes and like tokens from Young Pyromancer. So yeah, Beast can be really tough to deal with. And outside of like Double Bolt or Swords, sometimes it's not easy.
Yeah,
and you go. Sorry.
The fact that it's legendary is definitely unfortunate. Like it's good sometimes, but right like. When you have Questing Beast against like Esper Vial and they play a Caracas, that's unfortunate. But in Maverick specifically, right, we can just get a Wasteland and clear the way for it if we need to.
Yeah, I always thought lands was a pretty good matchup for Maverick, except for the starts where they were able to port us effectively and then have a few mazes for our threats.
Yeah.
But now when they try to maze our creatures with Questing Beast in play, it's just hilarious because it's not going to work out the way they want. And it's funny because that's the way that they're going to kind of realize how good Questing Beast is. That even, crop rotation for Glacial Chasm before damage is not going to work.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but...
Yes, someone playing Mono Green Cloudpost did that against me in a tournament, and I won. I had to call a judge to make sure they knew. I was like, can we get the Oracle text on Glacial Chasm? Because at first, right, like the wording on the card is that your life total... Like, if I don't remember, like it doesn't change or something.
Yep.
But like the Oracle text is it prevents the damage, and it's like, aha.
Yeah, so that means it gets around it gets around Tendrils, or Tendrils gets around it, and like Deathrite Shaman because that's loss of life.
Exactly. So yeah.
Yeah, Beast is always really good. There are times where I do forget about it a little bit. Like I'll attack a Planeswalker, and it's just like there's no reason to attack the Planeswalker.
There is one reason, and it happened to me in a challenge, but if they have a Leovold in play, you're going to want to attack the Planeswalker.
Ah, very nice.
They'll draw a card.
Yeah, that's very true. Interesting.
It happened only once to me, but when it did happen, I was like, oh, crap. Like that's not good.
I like that. I like always hearing about like the really marginal lines of where something is correct. Like in Maverick, there's no reason not to run snow basic lands. You might as well run them because it might give your opponent some misinformation. But there actually is a reason why you should, and it's because if your opponent gives you an Ice Fang Coatl with Oko, you now have the ability to also give it Death Touch on your side.
That's a good point.
Which is cool, yeah. And it's like, there's always a little thing.
I refuse to.
Well, it's funny, because in this list you do, but in this list you actually put in the Snow Basics.
Yeah. That so this in that list, that was when like Oko was really annoying, and I'm just like, well, I guess like Oko is really popular, right? So if you just led like snow-covered forest or snow-covered plains and didn't do anything,
Yeah,
they would probably assume you were Oko. Whereas
definitely.
now,
Or
yeah, now
even
Oko's a lot less popular.
the new like natural order kind of band lists that are running
Yeah.
around, which
So,
is pretty cool.
but right now I will take the 0.5% hit in my matchup margins because I don't know I think it's really annoying. It's annoying that snow basics are the right thing to do. So this is
Yeah.
my protest.
Okay. I I respect that. Did you have anything else that you wanted to touch on?
um, I don't think there's anything super crazy. Like questing beast is really good, and that's I think without questing beast right now, I definitely would say you shouldn't be playing green white Maverick.
Yep. Okay. Did we touch on Kaya?
We definitely did. Yeah,
I guess
Kaya's amazing.
one question is, what? How do you think the meta has to kind of shift for green white to come back to kind of the forefront of what Maverick players should be playing?
An easy answer is just like if Blood Moon starts being a card, like
Yeah.
green white's gonna be worth it.
Yeah.
Um,
Do you think
yeah,
like some sort of banning of say Ochre or Astrolabe is enough for blue prison players to come back and think that mono red prison's pretty good?
it might. It might. I would love it if they would ban either of those cards. Um,
Yeah.
I think it would definitely help because I think right now it's just playing prison, like playing Blood Moon has got to be like the dumbest thing right now. Like not as in like the person's dumb, but as in like experiencing that is like okay, this person's playing 4 colors and I've played a Blood Moon, but they turned one Astrolabe, so yes, they're fine. Like I would not be able to do too many of those games before I'm like, all right, I'm gonna take a break here, because yeah, that's crazy. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think basically land hate just has to be more popular so that you get punished for running 3 colors. That is one thing I remember. I wanted to say that I think 3 colors is kind of like the perfect spot where like if you're not getting land hated out, your mana base is still really consistent. Whereas I think 4 colors you get a lot closer to like your mana base on its own isn't always like consistent. So I think
Yeah.
that's why I would stick with 3 colors, because 4 colors, even if you aren't getting hated out, like you're gonna have really awkward draws sometimes.
Yeah, I definitely hate losing or falling behind because my mana isn't there. That's a pretty bad spot to be in, especially with a card like Leovold. In the decks that I played it in, I have made changes in the mana base to have at least like one drop so I can cast it. But there are times where you've drawn it, you don't have mana dogs out, and it's just you can't cast it.
Yeah, Leovold is a sweet magic card though. I really like Leovold.
Yeah, it's probably one of
If
the
there's a card worth splashing, that's one of the ones.
yeah. Okay. So say if you splashed it in this deck, would you add a trop or would you not worry about it?
I would probably add a drop just because
Okay.
I don't like not being able to cast my cards.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
Except Leyline of the Void. I think everyone should play Leyline, even if you're just straight green white.
Okay. Yeah.
Um,
I've definitely won games where I've mulled very aggressively for it, and luckily, it has slowed my opponent down enough for me to just draw into another 7 cards and find
yeah,
like a knight.
you just reminded me of a sweet game against Reanimator. It was like game 3, and I mulliganed to 1, and I kept a land because I literally I didn't see a Leyline once, and I kept a land. But they had mulled to like 5 to answer Leyline, and I won that game just by like answering a land. And then I drew a Thalia, and then I drew a land, and I just played the Thalia.
Nice.
I won that game without like that's like one of my favorite like games. It's just like you tell someone you're like, yeah, I beat Reanimator on a mull to 1, and they're like, oh, with the Leyline? We're like, no.
No, with the land.
Yeah, the basic planes.
That's hilarious. That's pretty much it.
Yeah,
Do you want to give a little spiel if anyone can find you online, where they can find you?
they can look at my Twitter account that I only like tweet when I 5-0,
Nice.
which is at Achillies27, spelled incorrectly. And also, it looks like I'm gonna start streaming probably weekly.
Oh, very cool.
Doing like the Legacy Challenge. Which is
Nice.
going to be twitch.tv/Achillies27 spelt incorrectly, so it should be easy to find.
Nice.
Yeah, I think that's about it for
Yeah,
like my
and then
stuff.
Discord, I guess. You're Achillies27 as well.
Yeah, and also if you play against me in Magic Online, and you're like, wow, I know this guy, just tell me, because it makes me feel good. When people are like, oh yeah, I recognize you from that thing, I'm like, that is sweet. I never expected this to happen. Like,
It's pretty.
Yeah.
It's pretty funny when I do the Maverick monthlies and go through like MTG Goldfish and TC decks to find like the 5 decks and the like good challenge finishes and stuff. I always just go straight to your profile and look at your latest 5 because I know you're gonna be there.
Yeah, it's really cool when people are like, yeah, like when I was the one who like was playing Once Upon a Time in Maverick, and they're like, oh, like you're the guy who's like people were calling Green White Maverick with Once Upon a Time like Achillies27 Maverick, and I'm like, that's
very cool. Yeah, definitely.
Like,
there's
yeah, so
there's definitely a few when you're playing like your 3 Walker sideboard Green White Maverick with like Nissa,
oh yeah, that was a good time.
Garok perhaps, and one other.
I was playing Elspeth and
Gideon. There we go.
Yes.
Yeah, there were so many exact 75s that went 5-0 with other players, and it's just like, this is just Achilles list.
Man.
What am I supposed to say?
Yeah, like keeping an eye on like the 5-0s for each week and just seeing my list continue to get results is like that's one of the best feelings as far as like Magic goes.
Yeah,
obviously, yeah. Like I feel like it's weird to hear someone say, "Yeah, that time they played my list, that was cool."
Yeah, no,
it really is.
It's a huge compliment, especially for a deck like Maverick, where traditionally no 2 lists are usually the same. There's usually a few changes between different Maverick lists, and that's always cool because you can, have like good chats about it and be like, oh, why do you play this over this? Because I actually play this over this. But when you do see a consistent list being played and getting 5-0s, you know that like the person who made that list is obviously onto something, because it's making people play that list, not play their own list, which is very cool.
Yeah. So. Yeah. If you recognize me, let me know. That's about it.
Nice. All right. Well, a huge thank you once again for coming on. This was
for having me.
Really cool. More than welcome. And I guess we will see you on stream in hopefully a very short time.
Yeah, hopefully Sunday. See how it goes.
Cool. All right. Enjoy your weekend. And I'll hopefully see you sometime soon, listeners.
All right.
Cheers, man.
Yep. Bye.
Bye.